Chapter 96. On the streets of Fengjian City, dozens of soldiers surrounded Lin Tian. The spears in their hands were swinging vigorously, creating gusts of wind that tore through the air. No pop-up window, unfortunately it was of no use. Bang! Lin Tian raised his leg and kicked another soldier away. The soldier fell far away, unable to get up again. Tilting his head to avoid a soldier's spear, Lin Tian grabbed the body of the spear. While sending the soldier flying, he also grabbed the spear. With a clang, the spear vibrated and sent another soldier flying. Damn it! Attack together, use a joint attack! Form the formation! A captain shouted. On the battlefield, the Empire's soldiers would often form small formations to increase their combat strength. These formations were naturally passed down by the formation masters. They were the most superficial joint attack formations, far from being comparable to the martial rune fusion. The dozens of soldiers moved to their positions, and soon formed a strange formation. Wild Python Formation! The leader of the soldiers shouted. In an instant, the aura of the dozens of soldiers seemed to perfectly merge together. A powerful aura spread out, as if a heavenly python was born. It brought about a shocking hurricane, extremely frightening. On the side of the street, a warrior was moved. The Wild Python Formation has many changes and sharp attacks. It's a joint attack formation that only the Imperial Army can use. I didn't expect to see it here. As he spoke, the warrior retreated further. Sushu was protecting Lin Qi. She was also moved when she saw this scene. She shouted, "Lin Tian, be careful. This is a joint attack formation. It can gather their attack power. Although it can't gather all of them, it can increase their combat strength by several times." Sushu was Mu Qin's disciple, so she naturally knew about the Wild Python Formation. At this moment, the Wild Python Formation had been formed. The dozens of soldiers gathered together, their sharp battle chi surging like flames. "Old Chen, these people are indeed your elites. They can actually use the Wild Python Formation to such an extent. It can be called a masterpiece." At the rear, Sheng Mo praised. Qin Ping's injuries had already stabilized. He smiled in satisfaction and said, "Usually, they train together. They are just very familiar with each other." Pausing for a moment, Qin Ping's gaze turned sinister as he stared at Lin Tiandao. "This little bastard killed young Master Zhou and then sneaked an attack on me while I was talking. I'll make sure he dies a horrible death," Li Yunong said. "This Wild Python Formation should be enough to take him down. But Old Chen, you have to say hello to your elites. It's best to capture this little beast alive and let the commander kill him personally. Don't worry, when that little bastard is about to die, I will stop them," Qin Ping said. In front of them, dozens of people lined up in a row, like a shocking giant python. "Kill!" the leader of the group shouted. This was an expert at the 9th level of body refinement. He was in charge of the head of the Wild Python Formation. "Kill! Kill! Kill!" In the Wild Python Formation, all the people in the formation roared in unison. Their battle aura grew denser, and their killing intent grew stronger. As soon as this battle chi appeared, it was unknown how many people in the surroundings paled, their faces turning pale. Dozens of soldiers moved, like wild pythons attacking, their momentum was unparalleled. In the face of such a joint attack, Lin Tiandao was expressionless. He just turned his right hand, and the spear in his hand flew out, piercing straight into the Wild Python Formation. "Ah!" Screams rang out immediately. Immediately, the entire Wild Python Formation suddenly collapsed as if it had lost its support. Behind them, the expressions of Li Yundong and the other two changed. "Impossible!" Qin Ping cried out. The Wild Python Formation was actually broken. Not only him, but Li Yundong and Jing Mo on the side also changed their expressions. "One blow! How is this possible?" Li Yundong was shocked. All around, the spectators on both sides of the street had already widened their eyes. What did he just do? The Wild Python Formation was broken! Many martial artists were shocked. the joint attack formation used by the army, passed down by the array manipulator. At this moment, it was actually broken by a casual blow. Even Sushu's eyes widened. As Mu Qing's last disciple, she knew very well that the wild python formation was not simple. Although Lin Tiandao was an expert of the divine pulse realm, it should take some effort to break this large formation. But at this moment, what shocked her was that Lin Tianji had just casually thrown the spear in his hand and actually defeated the wild python formation. Further away, on the second floor of Yibao Pavilion, Xian Yao and Pu Shi had been paying attention to the battle on the street. A snake hits its weak point, one blow is enough. Pu Shi laughed. Showing off such a joint attack in front of a third-tier array manipulator, childish. Xian Yao snorted. As soon as the wild python formation was broken, the dozens of soldiers' faces suddenly changed, and they all seemed to have become headless flies. This was the weakness of the combined formation technique. Although this kind of formation technique could gather the battle prowess of the people in the formation together, and increase their battle prowess, the instant the formation was broken, it would cause the people in the formation to fall into chaos for a short period of time. They would be like wild beasts that had lost their vision, and their individual battle prowess would be greatly reduced. Damn it! Regroup the formation! Quick! A soldier shouted. Lin Tianyi flashed and rushed straight in. Facing dozens of soldiers, Lin Tianyi was expressionless and merciless. With every punch and kick, the soldiers would scream and fly away. In the end, he even used the shadow fist. With one punch, 18 fist shadows flew out. Bang! 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 The sound of fists falling on flesh echoed constantly, and screams could be heard from time to time. In the blink of an eye, dozens of soldiers were all sent flying and lying on the ground in disorder, wailing incessantly. Looking at this scene, everyone on both sides of the street gasped at the same time. He had single-handedly wiped out a group of dozens of soldiers. These were all from the imperial city. How dare he! An angry roar sounded. Many people were shocked. They turned their heads and saw Chen Ping's gloomy face. Li Yundong and Jing Mo, who were standing beside Chen Ping, also had cold eyes. The three generals of Fengjian City, Chen Ping, Li Yundong, and Jing Mo, are all powerhouses of the divine range. That young man is in trouble. Can't he be patient in front of the imperial city? Many people swallowed their saliva. However, when these people turned their heads to look at Lin Tianyi, they couldn't help but be stunned. After sweeping away dozens of soldiers, Lin Tianyi didn't stop at all. He was actually closing in on Chen Ping and the other two. What is he going to do? Many people couldn't help but narrow their eyes. Looking at this scene, Xian Yao and Pushi on the second floor of the Yibao Pavilion couldn't help but smile. There's a good show to watch. Xian Yao smiled. For a moment, she was full of charm. On the streets of Fengjian City, Lin Tianyi closed in on Chen Ping and the other two. His eyes were cold, and his voice was even colder. You three pieces of trash really pissed me off. Everyone had something that they couldn't touch, just like a dragon's reverse scale. For Lin Tianyi in this life, Lin Shi was undoubtedly his reverse scale. This well-behaved, sensible, and considerate little girl was his only family member now. During these 3 months, he didn't fulfill any of his responsibilities as an older brother, didn't accompany Lin Shi. It was to the extent where it was often Lin Shi who cooked for him, delivered to his room, just like when he first arrived in this world. Now that he had reached the divine range realm, he took Lin Shi out to play. He didn't expect that Lin Shi, who was originally happy, would be frightened by this group of soldiers. This made him extremely angry. In a flash, Lin Tianyi appeared in front of the three people. Such speed caused the three of them to be shocked. Chen Ping raised his hand and grabbed the hilt of the broadsword at his waist, ready to pull it out. But at that moment, Lin Tianyi's right leg landed on his chest, and he flew backward like a meteor. He couldn't help but let out a painful groan. You! Li Yundong and Jing Mo's expressions changed. They reached out to grab Lin Tianyi. But they weren't as fast as Lin Tianyi. Lin Tianyi reached out his left hand and grabbed Li Yundong's wrist. With a little force, Li Yundong was suddenly flipped over and then fell to the ground. At the same time, Lin Tianyi raised his right hand and slapped Jing Mo's cheek. With a smack, Jing Mo was sent flying. A tooth fell out, mixed with blood. "Damn it! How dare you hit us!" Li Yundong roared. Lin Tianyi stared down at Li Yundong, his voice cold. "How dare I kill you!" He raised his leg and mercilessly kicked Li Yundong in the stomach. With a bang, Li Yundong flew across the ground and hit a pillar not far away. He opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of blood. "Oh my God! Where did this immortal come from? How can he be so strong? Those 3 generals are all in the Divine Pulse realm." Many martial artists were shocked. 3 Divine Pulse realm cultivators were standing together, but they were sent flying by a kick so easily. "Generals!" Many of the soldiers were also shocked. They stared at Lin Tianyi again, fear in their eyes. Is this man a monster? He looks so delicate, but his strength is so terrifying that he can send 3 generals flying with a kick. Chen Ping and the other 2 struggled to their feet, their faces pale. Damn it! Chen Ping's eyes were cold, and he was furious. On the other side, Li Yundong and Jing Mo looked equally embarrassed. The 3 of them were the 3 generals of Governor Feng. They were powerful and famous, second only to the governor and the commander-in-chief. Everyone in Governor Feng knew them. But now, they were kicked away by a young man. It was humiliating. "If I don't kill you, I, Chen Ping, am not human," Chen Ping said coldly. "Is that so?" Lin Tianyi's eyes turned cold. "Then you should stop being a human. Be a beast in your next life." Lin Tianyi stomped on the ground with his right leg and a battle spear flew up into the air. Lin Tianyi grasped the spear in his hand and used the lightning sword to control it. The spear cut through the air as fast as lightning. Puff! In an instant, blood splattered everywhere as the spear pierced through Chen Ping's chest like a beam of light. That violent force dragged Chen Ping's corpse all the way until it was nailed to a stone wall 130 feet away. Blood dyed the wall red. Seeing this scene, some people immediately screamed, "Murder! Murder! Murder!" Many people trembled in fear. Most of the people around were ordinary civilians. Seeing this scene, how could they not be afraid? Chapter 97. Chen Ping's body was nailed to the wall in the distance. Blood flowed out. It was a shocking scene. A Divine Pulse Realm powerhouse was killed just like that. "How dare you kill an Imperial General?" Li Yundong's expression changed. On the other side, Jing Mo's expression was also ugly. "Don't try to scare me with the Imperial General. In my eyes, you are nothing. You are meaningless." Looking at the 2 indifferently, Lin Tian's voice was very cold. "Didn't you put on this show together to kill me for Zhou He? You came to kill me, and I killed you. It's fair and reasonable. What's wrong with that?" Lin Tianyi could see the purpose of the 3 at a glance. He killed Zhou Hao, and Zhou Hao was the son of Commander Zhou He. As soldiers under Zhou He, they were obviously here to kill the commander. As for the 3 soldiers who rushed at him at the beginning, they were just the fuse that the 3 had prepared. They just wanted an excuse to deal with him. "You!" Li Yundong's face suddenly turned livid. Lin Tian was right. They were here to kill Lin Tian. Staring at the 2, Lin Tian's eyes were cold. He stepped forward step by step. "If it were any other time, I might have just let it go. But you really know how to pick a time to provoke me at this time. Do you think I'm easy to bully?" Lin Tian had always adhered to the principle that if others didn't offend him, he wouldn't offend them. These 3 generals wanted to kill him, so he naturally wouldn't show mercy. What's more, because of these 3 people, Lin Shi was frightened. This was something he couldn't tolerate no matter what. As an elder brother, how could he let his sister be wronged? Staring at the 2, he stepped forward step by step, not hiding his killing intent at all. Meeting Lin Tian's gaze, Li Yundong and Jing Mo both trembled. "Together!" Li Yundong and Jing Mo looked at each other, nodded at the same time, and pulled out their weapons. Li Yundong used a sword, and Jing Mo used a spear. Clang! For a moment, two ear-piercing sounds of weapons rang out. Kill! The two roared and rushed toward Lin Tian at the same time. For a time, intense true essence fluctuations intertwined, extremely shocking. Li Yundong brandished his long sword. The sound of the sword was ear-piercing, and the shadow of the sword was everywhere, carrying a fierce, murderous aura. On the other side, the long spear in Jing Mo's hand was even more domineering. The spear was like a dragon, shocking people. So strong! Some martial artists were surprised. Was this the strength of a divine vein realm general? It was indeed terrifying. Li Yundong's sword was very long and wide, so it was naturally stronger than ordinary swords. At this moment, the blade in his hand was suffused with a faint blood-red light, and the murderous aura was even more intense. It mercilessly slashed toward Lin Tian. This sword strike caused the air to hiss. Lin Tian's face was expressionless. His body swayed slightly, and he easily avoided the attack. At the same time, he slapped the sword with his palm. Clang! All of a sudden, the sword whistled. Li Yundong felt his hand go numb, and his expression changed. At this moment, Sheng Mo's spear arrived. Like a wild dragon, it went straight for Lin Tian's face. At this moment, the tip of the spear was only 10 feet away from Lin Tianji. There was absolutely no possibility of him dodging. Kill! Sheng Mo's eyes flashed, and he couldn't help but shout coldly. Suddenly, the spear moved faster, and its aura became even more terrifying. In an instant, it appeared 3 feet away from Lin Tian. Die! Jing Mo shouted loudly. This attack had succeeded. At this moment, Lin Tian moved. He simply raised his right hand and grasped the incoming spear. Suddenly, the spear stopped. The tip of the spear was only half a foot away from his face. You! Jing Mo's expression changed. He urged the spear with all his might, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't make it move an inch. He couldn't even pull the spear back. On the other side, Li Yundong's expression changed. He leaped up and slashed down with his sword. Lin Tian moved slightly. He held the spear and turned it, blocking Li Yundong's sword. The spear and sword collided with a crisp clang. Li Yundong retreated. Jing Mo's hands were numb from the impact of Li Yundong's sword. Lin Tian held the end of the spear with one hand and stared coldly at the two men. Since you're here for Zhou Hao's death, then you should know that I killed him when I was in the 9th level of the body refinement realm. Now that I've entered the divine vein realm, how dare you provoke me? Do you really think that your status as a general can protect you? As he spoke, he shook his right hand. Instantly, a fierce force passed through the spear and shook Jing Mo's hands away. He easily blocked the joint attack of two generals. Everyone's hearts trembled. Just how strong was he? Li Yundong and Jing Mo stared at Lin Tian again. Their expressions turned ugly, and they didn't dare to act rashly. A moment later, they seemed to have come to the same decision. They looked at each other and nodded. Very well! Let's call it quits for today. However, you will pay a heavy price for killing Qinping, Li Yundong said coldly. He and Jing Mo were not weak, and they were people who had been on the battlefield. After a few simple exchanges, they understood how terrifying Lin Tian was. They were definitely not a match for him. Retreating now was the best choice. With that, Li Yundong and Jing Mo turned around and left. Whoosh! A spear flew over and stabbed in front of the two men. Let's call it quits. Lin Tianling laughed. Who do you think I am? You came when you wanted to kill me, and you left when you couldn't beat me? Staring at Lin Tian, many people couldn't help but gasp. How dare this person be so domineering? Some martial artists' hearts trembled. Facing the generals of the empire, he actually had such an attitude. It was really shocking. Li Yundong and Jing Mo's expressions were particularly ugly. You still want to kill us? I already said that you came to kill me, and I'll kill you. It's fair and reasonable. Lin Tianling said coldly. As soon as he finished speaking, his feet moved slightly, and in an instant he was in front of Li Yundong. Li Yundong was shocked by Lin Tian's monstrous speed. However, he was, after all, a person who had been on the battlefield. Although he was shocked, his movements were not slow. He raised his long sword and slashed at Lin Tian. Lin Tianling snorted. His right hand grabbed Li Yundong's sword-holding hand and twisted violently. Suddenly, there was the sound of bones breaking, and the long sword in Li Yundong's hand was easily snatched away. Die, he said coldly. With a wave of the long sword, blood rose, and Li Yundong's throat was directly cut open. Li Yundong fell to the ground with a bang. His eyes were wide open, and he opened his mouth to say something, but he couldn't spit out a word. Instead, blood kept gushing out, and his whole body convulsed. However, after only 10 breaths, Li Yundong was completely still. After killing Li Yundong, Lin Tian acted as if nothing had happened. He tilted his head and looked behind him. At some point, Su Shu had covered Lin Shi's eyes. Lin Tian's heart warmed. He nodded to Su Shu in thanks. He didn't want Lin Shi to see such a bloody scene. He turned his head again and looked at Jing Mo. Without a word, he closed in on the other party. You. Jing Mo trembled. He wanted to run, but he was afraid of losing face. If he didn't run, he would lose his life. For a moment, his expression was extremely ugly. At this time, Lin Tian was completely close. Clang! The ear-piercing sound of a sword rang out, and the killing intent was overwhelming. Jing Mo no longer cared about face. He turned around and ran. The Imperial General actually ran away? Many people were stunned. Lin Tian stopped, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. He kicked up a spear beside his feet. Instantly, the spear seemed to have turned into a bolt of lightning as it flew out and pierced into Jing Mo's chest. Ah! Jing Mo screamed. The spear dragged him 7 zhang away, and he fell to the ground with a bang. Blood flowed out and quickly dyed the ground red. Jing Mo struggled on the ground for a moment. In the end, like Li Yundong, he stopped moving. For a moment, the surroundings were silent. Many people's lips trembled, and they couldn't say a word for a long time. Especially the ordinary soldiers who had been defeated by Lin Tian. Their faces were pale, and fear was written all over their faces. The 3 Divine Vein Realm generals had all been killed. Lin Tian glanced at the corpses of Jing Mo and the other 2. He casually threw away the sword in his hand and walked toward Lin Shi and Su Shu. Xiaoxi, let's go back, he said softly. After such a thing happened, whether it was him, Lin Shi, or Su Shu, they probably weren't in the mood to continue playing. Oh, Lin Shi answered softly. Su Shu had noticed before Lin Tian had killed Jinping. She had covered Lin Shi's eyes, so Lin Shi hadn't seen Lin Tian. Lin Tian took Lin Shi's hand, then turned to Su Shu and smiled gratefully. Let's go! Su Shu snorted. Lin Tian took Lin Shi's hand and told Lin Shi not to look back. Soon they left. Only when Lin Tian was completely gone did the crowd let out a sigh of relief. Oh my God, this is going to be a big mess. 3 Divine Pulse Realm generals were killed just like that. Killing the generals of the Empire on the street. That young man is simply a madman. Many people's hearts trembled. Breaking the wild python formation, sweeping through dozens of soldiers, and killing 3 Divine Pulse Realm generals. This was definitely a super earthquake that would shake the entire Fengjian city. That Lin Tian is already so strong? This is unimaginable. The change is too big. Compared to before, this is a completely different person. Many of the Fengjian city locals were terrified. The dozens of soldiers on the ground trembled as they stood up. Each of them had a pale face. Some of them picked up the corpses of Jinping and the others, and a group of people quickly left. Looking at the back of this group of soldiers hurriedly leaving, the crowd couldn't help but sigh. These soldiers of the Empire were usually so high and mighty because they represented the power of the Empire. Ordinary people didn't dare to provoke them. But today, a delicate young man swept through dozens of people on the street and killed 3 Divine Pulse Realm generals. Looking at the bloodstains on the ground, many people suddenly felt a chill down their spines. Too ruthless! Too arrogant! Someone murmured. On the second floor of the Yibao pavilion, by the window, Xian Yao and Pushi's eyes flashed with a strange light. That guy is quite gentle. I didn't expect him to have such a ruthless side. He actually killed Chenping and the others on the street. Xian Yao whispered to herself. Pushi thought for a moment and said, I'm afraid that those 3 people touched something they shouldn't have. What's something they shouldn't have touched? Xian Yao was curious. Miss, didn't you notice? After that little brother killed Li Yundong, he turned around and looked behind him. His gaze fell on the little girl in the white dress. After he killed Jing Mo, he immediately went to the little girl and took her away. When he looked at the little girl, the concern and doting in his eyes were obviously very strong. Pushi said in a deep voice. Xian Yao frowned. But that girl looked like she was just a little frightened and didn't suffer any real injuries. That guy wouldn't kill people on the street for such a small thing, right? Moreover, he killed 3 Divine Pulse Realm generals. For some people, this is more than enough, the old man said. Pushi shook his head and said, Legend has it that there is a scale on the neck of a dragon that is upside down. If anyone touches it, the dragon will kill them. Miss, do you understand what I mean? Xian Yao's body trembled slightly, and she whispered to herself, The dragon has a reverse scale. Anyone who touches it will die. Chapter 98. Fengjian City was in an uproar. A young man killed 3 generals on the street. This news spread throughout the city in the blink of an eye, shocking countless people. Is this true? It can't be. Who dares to be so bold? Is he tired of living? Oh my God, this world is too crazy. This city is going to be in chaos. The 3 generals of Fengjian City were all retired soldiers from the battlefield. They are people of the empire. Both the commander and the city lord will not sit idly by. They will definitely make the murderer pay a heavy price. Everyone was shocked. The 3 generals were killed. This was a huge matter. The commander's residence naturally received the news immediately. Moreover, dozens of soldiers brought the corpses of the 3 generals to the commander's residence. Commander-in-Chief, please avenge the 3 generals! A soldier shouted. Looking at the 3 corpses, he was furious. His son was dead. Now, his 3 most capable subordinates were killed by the same person. What a little bastard! You have guts. This time, let's see who can protect you. Zhouhe's face was extremely gloomy. He roared, Men, go and report to the city lord. Gather all the troops and go to the Nanyang Martial House to arrest him. Yes. A soldier responded and quickly ran out. Zhouhe's eyes were filled with killing intent. He clenched his fists and said, Howard, just you wait. I will avenge you soon. I will personally kill that little bastard in front of your tombstone. Today's matter was planned by him. Although it didn't succeed, the 3 generals were killed. He had enough reason to lead the troops to arrest Lin Tian. A war horse with a bloody aura rushed out of the commander's residence. The horse was extremely fast and rushed madly towards the city lord's residence. This scene was seen by many people. Some of the smarter ones suddenly had a thought. They smelled the scent of war. It's really going to be chaotic. Someone muttered to himself. Lin Tian pulled Lin Shi back to the martial house. He tidied up the things that Sushu and Lin Shi bought. There were quite a lot of things, but they were all small things. Thank you so much for today. Lin Tian looked at Sushu and said. He was referring to how Sushu had blindfolded Lin Shi when he was killing people. Although this action was small, it had great significance. Sushu frowned and said, You still have the nerve to say that. Don't you think before you act? Lin Shi is still young. She can only rely on you, her big brother. If Lin Shi sees you killing people, she will be sad and scared. Do you want Lin Shi to have nightmares every day? Do you want Lin Shi to fear you? Lin Tianyi was embarrassed. You're right. I didn't think it through. As she spoke, Lin Tian looked towards Lin Shi's room. The little girl was decorating her room with some small things that she had bought in the city. He looked at Lin Shi with a gentle smile on his face. All right, stop looking. Let's think about other things. Su Shu curled her lips and said, Other things? What things? Lin Tian was curious. What things? Su Shu gritted her teeth and looked like she wanted to bite someone. You killed 3 generals on the street. This is 1,000 times more serious than killing Zhou Hao. Do you think Zhou He will let it go? Killing those 3 generals is just an excuse for him to deal with you. Even the martial house can't protect you after committing such a crime. Thinking about the consequences of this matter, Su Shu was even more angry. Why are you always so impulsive? They scared Xiaoxi and wanted to kill me. Of course, I had to fight back. Our parents didn't raise us to be bullied. Lin Tianyi didn't care at all. You. Su Shu stared at Lin Tian. I'm talking about serious business. I'm also talking about serious business. Lin Tian stared at Su Shu and suddenly laughed. Little Su Shu, are you afraid that I'll die? Who's afraid that you'll die? You can die now. I'll take good care of Lin Shi for you. Su Shu gritted her teeth. Lin Tian smiled and couldn't help but laugh. What are you laughing at? Nothing, nothing. Lin Tian shook his head and said with a smile. Anyway, don't worry. It's best that Zhou He stays quiet. If he wants to do something, I'll give him a surprise. Su Shu stared at Lin Tian. What is this guy talking about? Do you have a fever? Su Shu reached out to touch Lin Tian's forehead. Lin Tianyi was speechless. He took away Su Shu's hand from his forehead. Don't worry. I'm normal. Don't worry. Sister Su. A sweet voice sounded. Lin Shi was calling for Su Shu in the room. They didn't know what it was about. Lin Tian glanced over and then looked at Su Shu with a smile. Thank you for taking care of my sister. I like her. It has nothing to do with you. Su Shu snorted. After that, she got up and walked to Lin Shi's room. Right now it was noon. The 3 of them bought quite a few ingredients. Lin Shi and Su Shu worked together. Not long after, a fragrant meal was placed on the table. You're indeed my sister. You're so good at cooking. Lin Tian praised. Hey! There's still me. We made it together. Su Shu was dissatisfied. Right, I almost forgot. Lin Tian said with a smile. Speaking of which, I'm quite surprised that you know how to cook. What do you mean? Su Shu gritted her teeth and glared at Lin Tian. Lin Tian blushed with shame. He was really just a little surprised. However, it seemed that Su Shu took this sentence as a joke. The meal ended quickly. After cleaning up the dishes, Lin Tian reminded Lin Shi not to run around. Then, he walked out with Su Shu. Where are you going? Su Shu asked. Lin Tian now. The inner house selection has ended a few days ago. I should go to the inner house to report. It's rare that you can think of this. Su Shu was surprised. Lin Tian. At a fork in the road, Lin Tian and Su Shu parted ways and walked towards the inner house. The Nine-Yang martial house was divided into the inner house and the outer house. Compared to the outer house, the inner house had a cultivation area. The cultivation environment and living conditions of the inner house disciples were much better than the outer house disciples. In addition, there were various privileges and cultivation resources. Therefore, entering the inner house was the dream of all the disciples. Lin Tian passed through a few corners and quickly arrived at the inner house. There were 2 deacons guarding the gate. Lin Tian handed over his identity jade card that had already refreshed. The 2 deacons were surprised. You are that Lin Tian? That's me. Lin Tian nodded. The 2 deacons looked at Lin Tian strangely and handed the jade card back. It's fine. Go in. Lin Tian was a little puzzled, but he didn't ask. He put away the jade card and stepped in. After registering in the inner house, Lin Tian came to the inner house cultivation area. The elder in charge of the inner house reminded him that the inner house disciples spent most of their time cultivating in the inner house cultivation area. When he entered the cultivation area, he saw 3 men. Among the three, one of them had a sturdy physique. He was waving his fists and fighting with a long-robed youth. Not far away, a black-robed youth was standing with his arms crossed, watching the two fight. Bang! 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 The sturdy youth and the long-robed youth were fighting. The sound of fists and palms colliding could be heard constantly, like the beating of a drum. Lin Tian was secretly surprised. These two people were very strong. Stop! That's all for today. The long-robed youth's voice sounded. The burly young man smiled and stopped. At this time, Lin Tian stepped forward. 3 senior brothers, I am a new disciple in the inner house. My name is... However, before he could finish his words, the young man in a long robe took a step forward and appeared in front of him. Junior brother Lin Tian, the long-robed youth said. Not far away, the sturdy youth and the black-robed youth also tilted their heads and looked over. Lin Tian was a little surprised. Senior brother, you know me? After all, he was a new disciple. Logically speaking, the person in front of him was his senior brother. Lin Tian naturally would not be rude. I know, of course I know. The long-robed youth smiled. During the inner house selections, the 3 of us went to watch. Your last battle was really wonderful, Lin Tian said modestly. Senior brother, you flatter me. While speaking, Lin Tian was a little surprised. These 3 powerful inner house disciples actually went to watch the battle in person. At this time, the sturdy youth walked over and took the initiative to extend his right hand to Lin Tian. He smiled. Hello, junior brother Lin. I am Tianze. You can call me senior brother Tian, or just call me Tianze. Lin Tian reached out and shook hands with Tianze. Hello, senior brother Tian. This Tianze seemed to be a straightforward person, easily making people feel close to him. Tianze smiled and said, The guy in front of you is called Tao Bai, a palm user. After a pause, Tianze pointed to the black-robed youth on the other side. That guy is called Kong Hang, a sword user like you, the second strongest disciple in the inner house. After Tianze finished speaking, Kong Hang nodded to Lin Tian, then looked to the other side. Don't mind, this guy has always been cool like this. The young man in long robes, Tao Bai, patted Lin Tian on the shoulder and leaned over. Let me tell you a secret. When he was watching your battle, this guy had a very high evaluation of you. He even said that your comprehension of sword arts is something that even he is unable to compare to. Talk too much. Kong Hang snorted. The inner house was not as big as the outer house, but the environment was very good, and the air was very fresh. Tao Bai stood beside Lin Tian, introducing some people and things in the inner house to Lin Tian. At this time, in the corridor not far away, a purple-robed youth walked by. Senior brother Su, Tao Bai shouted. There is a new disciple in the inner house, the only one who entered this year. Senior brother, you should come and say hello. The purple-robed youth stopped, glanced at Lin Tian, and said coldly, There is no need for a dying man. After saying that, the purple-robed youth walked away, and soon disappeared from their sight. Tisk, arrogant guy, Tao Bai said unhappily. Lin Tian stared at the purple-robed youth, not caring about his attitude, but a little concerned about the purple-robed youth's words. He looked at Tao Bai and said, Senior brother, what does he mean by dying man? This? Staring at Lin Tian, Tao Bai was stunned. You don't know? Not only Tao Bai, but even Tianze and Kong Hang looked at Lin Tian with a strange expression. I don't know. Lin Tian shook his head. He really did not know what was going on. Tao Bai was speechless. Junior brother Lin, no! Brother Lin, you are wrong! Ancestor Lin, how can you not know what you have done? Spreading out his hands, Tao Bai continued. You killed 3 generals in the streets of Fengjian City, causing a storm in the city. This is a big deal, super big trouble. Chapter 99. Tao Bai called it big trouble, but it was already very tactful. If he were to say it bluntly, it would be a matter of losing his head. Hearing Tao Bai's words, Lin Tian suddenly understood and whispered. So it's about this. He suddenly remembered that when he entered the inner palace, the two deacons looked at him strangely. It turned out that the news of him killing Chen Ping and the other two had already spread to the Nanyang martial house. Seeing Lin Tian's expression, Tao Bai was slightly surprised. "You're not worried at all?" "I'm not worried," Lin Tian said. "I don't think I did anything wrong. They asked for it." Tao Bai and the other two looked at Lin Tian and saw that Lin Tian's expression was calm, without the slightest pretense of calmness. A strange light flashed in their eyes. "Brother Lin is indeed extraordinary." Tao Bai smiled. Lin Tian shook his head. "You flatter me, senior brother." Tao Bai waved his hand and said, "Don't be so formal, let's be casual. Don't call me senior brother or junior brother. We're about the same age, so just call me by name." "Okay." Lin Tian smiled. He was not the kind of person who was too formal. "Brother Lin just entered the inner palace. How about this, the three of us will take you around the inner palace?" Tianze suggested. Lin Tian nodded. "Okay, then I'll have to trouble you." "It's my pleasure." Tianze smiled. The three of them took Lin Tian to familiarize himself with the inner palace and briefly talked about the daily life of the inner palace disciples. Of course, the most important thing was the resources of the inner palace disciples. "We inner palace disciples have 4 advantages. First, we don't have a time limit to choose martial skills. Second, we can receive 10 fasting pills every month. Third, we can accumulate 20 days of cultivation in the wild wave heavy array and true energy condensation array. Fourth, only inner palace disciples are qualified to participate in the imperial courtyard selection." Lin Tian nodded. He had already heard about these things from Luo Xiao. "Next, let's talk about the inner house members." Tao Bai said, "There are a total of 29 people in the inner house. Including you, there are exactly 30 people. Among these 30 people, there are 10 at the 8th level of the refinement realm, 9 at the 9th level of the refinement realm, 6 at the early stage of the divine range realm, 4 at the 2nd level of the divine range realm, and 1 at the 3rd level of the divine range realm." Lin Tian was moved. Although there weren't many inner palace disciples, each and every one of them was an elite. Even the weakest was at the 8th body refinement layer. He carefully observed Tao Bai and the other two and discovered that Tao Bai and Tianze were at the early stage of the divine range while Kong Heng was at the 2nd stage of the divine range. Lin Tian suddenly recalled the purple-clothed youth from before. "That purple-clothed young man, could he be?" Lin Tian asked Tao Bai. He remembered that Tao Bai had addressed the purple-clothed youth as senior brother. Tao Bai nodded and said, "Su Muyang, peak of the 3rd level of the divine range, the number 1 in the inner palace. Very arrogant." After pausing for a moment, Tao Bai suddenly approached Lin Tian. "Just a friendly reminder, Su Muyang's relationship with MOG is not bad, you know." Most people in the martial house knew about the grudge between Lin Tian and the Mo family, and Tao Bai was naturally no exception. "Many thanks." Lin Tian nodded, naturally understanding Tao Bai's good intentions. Tao Bai waved his hand, indicating that he didn't need to care. Tao Bai and the other two were around 18 years old. Except for Kong Heng, who didn't like to talk much, Tao Bai and Tianze were very friendly. Walking with these three, Lin Tian didn't feel awkward. Very soon, the 3 people brought Lin Tian to tour the entire inner palace. "I've really troubled you guys today." Lin Tian now thanked them. He had been in the inner palace for an hour and had already registered everything. He had also received the fasting pills, so he wanted to go back first. "Brother Lin, are you not moving to the inner palace district?" Tao Bai asked. The inner palace disciples all had their own residences in the inner palace district, and the conditions were much better than the outer palace disciples' residences. Most importantly, living in the inner palace district meant that their daily cultivation would be much better. This chapter is not finished, please turn the page. No. Lin Tian shook his head and smiled. "I'm used to the old place. I didn't expect Brother Lin to be such a nostalgic person. I like this kind of person, the most suitable to be friends." Tao Bai smiled. After pausing for a moment, Tao Bai's face became slightly more solemn. This may be a bit abrupt, but Brother Lin, are you really not worried about today's matter? Or do you already have a way to deal with it? After Tao Bai said this, Tian Zhe also looked at Lin Tian, and even Kong Heng was no exception. Lin Tian paused for a moment and smiled. You can say that. The three were stunned for a moment, then they also smiled. That's good, Tao Bai said. After all, the three of them appreciated Lin Tian, and didn't want Lin Tian to die prematurely. Lin Tian chatted with the three for a while, and after a while, he waved his hand and bade farewell. Not long after, Lin Tian returned to the martial house and started to pack his things. Now that I have reached the Divine Vein Realm, I should go and pick a Divine Vein Realm martial technique, Lin Tian muttered to himself. The Sky Thunder Sword art was powerful enough, but it was only 30%, and he had already finished cultivating it. After thinking about it, he decided to pack his things and go to the martial arts library. Fengjian City's streets extended in all directions, and 4 hours after noon, all the streets shook. Armored horses trampled on the streets, raising dust. Dense groups of soldiers appeared from all 4 directions of Fengjian City. The momentum was so strong that some ordinary people were so shocked that their faces turned pale. What happened? Could it be that an empire is invading? Many ordinary people were terrified. However, some martial artists noticed something strange. These people seem to be Fengjian City soldiers, and they are marching towards the Nine Suns martial house. Many people were shocked and quickly connected the dots to what happened in the morning. It is said that the young man who killed the 3 generals of Fengjian City was a disciple of the Nine Suns martial house. Are these soldiers going to the Nine Suns martial house to ask for him? Look over there, it's Commander Zhou He. Also, the city lord. Many people were shocked. On the streets of Fengjian City, there were more than 1,000 Empire's soldiers. Every one of them had a cold expression, and they were wearing military armor. At the front of these soldiers were 2 war horses, and 2 middle-aged men were sitting on them. One of them was tall and sturdy, and his aura was shocking. He was Zhou He. The other person was slightly chubby, but his aura was not weaker than Zhou He. In fact, it was even stronger. He was the city lord of Fengjian City. Just a while ago, Zhou He had ordered someone to inform the city lord of Lin Tianxiao's death. The city lord of Fengjian City was so angry that he smashed a mahogany table. Chen Ping and the other 2 were Divine Vein Realm experts, and they were second only to the commander in Fengjian City. Now that they had been killed on the streets, how could the city lord of Fengjian City not be angry? The city lord of Fengjian City had given his consent to Zhou He gathering troops and heading to the Nine Suns martial house. After all, they were going to the Nine Suns martial house to ask for their men. Stomp, stomp, stomp. The sound of armored horses trampling on the streets could be heard, and sand was kicked up. On the 2nd floor of Yibao Pavilion, Puxi and Xian Yao were naturally alarmed by the noise. Elder Puxi, this is... Xian Yao squinted her eyes and asked. Puxi nodded. The 3 of them are not ordinary. These people are probably going to the martial house to ask for their men. Xian Yao's eyes lit up. If the city lord and the commander are going to the martial house to ask for their men, the Nine Suns martial house might not be able to protect that guy. If that's the case, that guy's teacher might appear. Puxi couldn't help but smile mysteriously. Elder Puxi, what are you smiling about? Xian Yao felt strange. Puxi said, Nothing. It's just that little brother isn't that easy. It's easy to catch him. Such a small matter is really not enough to alarm the people behind him. Small matter? Could it be that he can handle it himself? Xian Yao was surprised. It's very simple. Puxi nodded and smiled. Miss seems to be interested in him. Do you want to take a look? Yes. Xian Yao nodded vigorously. Her eyes sparkled, making her look even more charming. Puxi and Xian Yao walked down from the 2nd floor and followed the troops to the Nine Suns martial house. On this day, almost at the same time, all the forces in Fengjian City were alarmed. The Mo family. What? There's such a thing? Mo Hai was pleasantly surprised. That's right, Patriarch. That Lin Tian killed 3 generals on the streets. Now, the city lord and the commander are personally leading 1,000 guards to the 9 Sons Martial House to ask for their men. A disciple of the Mo family said excitedly. Mo Hai slammed the wooden table beside him. Good, good, good. Let's see how that little bastard can survive this time. Does the Patriarch want to take a look? The disciple of the Mo family asked. Of course. Lead the way, Mo Hai said. For the Mo family and Mo Hai, this was undoubtedly the best thing that had happened in the past few months. The Qin family. What? The commander and the city lord are going to the 9 Sons Martial House to ask for Lin Tian? Qin Luo was shocked. Was Lin Tian in danger? Thinking of this, Qin Luo couldn't help but panic. Patriarch, why are you panicking? If that Lin Tian is really suppressed by the commander and the city lord, it should be a good thing for the Qin family. This way, we can take over all of the Lin family's properties. Some of the higher-ups of the Qin family frowned. The higher-ups of the Qin family all knew about the relationship between Lin Tian and the Qin family. After all, this matter could be hidden from others, but it couldn't be hidden from the higher-ups. What do you know? Don't talk nonsense, Qin Luo shouted. The upper echelons of the Qin clan knew that Lin Tian was cooperating with the Qin clan, but only Qin Luo knew that Lin Tian was not only a disciple of the 9 Yang Martial House, but he was also an array manipulator that surpassed the 2nd stage. If Lin Tian cooperated with the Qin family, it meant that the Qin family had a 2nd stage array controller behind them. This was more valuable than taking over all of the Lin family's properties. It could be said that if something really happened to Lin Tian, it wouldn't be good for the Qin family's future development. No. I have to go take a look, Qin Luo said anxiously. Qin Luo rushed out of the main hall and went to the 9 Yang Martial House. On this day, all the forces in Fengjian City were alarmed. They had different attitudes and emotions. However, most people were just watching the show. At this time, the city lord and commander Zhou He had already led over 1,000 soldiers to the 9 Yang Martial House's main gate. Over 1,000 soldiers gathered together, and most of them were experts at the 7th and 8th body refinement realm. Adding on the fact that they had all been on the battlefield before, their combined might could be said to be very terrifying, causing many of the onlookers to turn pale. They actually surrounded the 9 Yang Martial House. What a big battle array! This is the Imperial Army! Who dares to provoke them? Many people whispered. In the 9 Yang Martial House, many disciples looked at this scene and their faces turned ugly. In Fengjian City, there were actually people who dared to surround the 9 Yang Martial House. At the same time, a cold snort sounded. Sherdong and Mu Qing came in, followed by a group of instructors. None of them were weak. Sherdong stood in front of the 9 Yang Martial House's main gate and stared at the city lord and Zhou He. His voice was cold. Duan Yan, Zhou He, you've eaten a leopard's heart. How dare you cause trouble in my 9 Yang Martial House? End of chapter. Chapter 100. Duan Yan was the governor of Fengjian City, and Zhou He was the commander-in-chief of Fengjian City. They were both high and mighty figures, but in the eyes of Sherdong and Mu Qing, they were nothing. Sherdong and Mu He stared at the two of them coldly. A powerful aura spread out, causing the soldiers outside the martial mansion to tremble. An expert at the peak of the Divine Vein realm was no joke. Elders, please calm down. We didn't mean to offend you. Duan Yan got off his horse and said, I received news that a disciple called Lin Tian from the 9 Yang Martial Mansion killed 3 Divine Pulse Realm generals in Fengjian City. I believe the two of you should understand the severity of this matter. Duan Yan's cultivation wasn't weak. He was at the 7th level of the Divine Vein realm. However, he was slightly weaker than Sherdong and Mu Qing. Although he was the city lord, in terms of status, Sherdong and Mu Qing weren't any lower than him. In fact, in some sense, they were even higher. Therefore, Duan Yin didn't get angry at Sherdong's reprimand and appeared to be very calm. Seeing Duan Yin get off his horse, Zhou He also got off his horse and stood quietly at the side. Sherdong and Mu Qing looked at Zhou He coldly. City Lord Duan, have you asked your subordinates why such a thing happened today? Mu Qing asked. Duan Yin was slightly puzzled and asked, Elder Mu, what do you mean? Sherdong's temper wasn't as good as Mu Qing's. He snorted and said, Why? Ask him yourself. Duan Yin was even more puzzled. He tilted his head and asked, Zhou He, what's going on? Governor, I don't know what Elder Shi and Elder Mu mean. Zhou He shook his head. Sherdong stared at Zhou He and said coldly, Zhou He, put away your tricks. Do you think we don't know what's going on today? You should be glad that we didn't come to find trouble with you. How dare you gather your troops at the gate of the martial mansion? Do you think the Nine-Yang martial mansion is a decoration? The news of Lin Tian killing Chen Ping and the other two had spread throughout Fengjian City. Sherdong and Mu Qing naturally knew about it. Moreover, the two of them had personally asked Sushu about the details of the entire incident. As elders of the martial house, not only were their cultivations powerful, they were also extremely experienced. How could they not see through this scheme? Something like this happened right after Zhou Hao died. No matter how one looked at it, there was a big problem. Something fishy? I have no idea what you're talking about. Zhou He continued. Today, 3 soldiers were ordered to deliver a letter of challenge to me, but they were stopped by your martial house disciple, Lin Tian. The 3 soldiers only scolded him a little before they were beaten up. Chen Ping and the other 2 happened to be passing by, and after they scolded him a little, they were killed on the street. Nonsense! A voice rang out. Sushu stood out from behind Mu Qing and glared at Zhou He. It was clearly those 3 soldiers who deliberately urged their horses to crash into us. Later, because the horses were inexplicably frightened, they were thrown off their horses. Because of this, those 3 wanted to capture us. Lin Tian only made a move out of self-defense. Coincidentally, just as this happened, 3 generals led their troops over as if they had calculated the time beforehand. What's worse is that these 3 generals didn't even ask about it, and immediately ordered to suppress us. This is obviously some people with ulterior motives, deliberately trying to harm others. At this point, Sushu changed the topic and said, "Oh right, Commander Zhou, not long ago, in a fair death match, your son, Zhou Hao, died at the hands of Lin Tian. Today's matter couldn't be a scheme of yours, right?" As soon as Sushu finished speaking, the expressions of many people in the surroundings changed, and all of them had strange expressions. The commander's son was killed in a death match? There's actually such a thing? This, now that you mention it, it's indeed a bit strange. It's too much of a coincidence. That's true, but there's no evidence. It's just a guess. Many people were talking about it. In the distance, Xian Yao and Pushi stood among the ordinary people, slightly surprised. This little brother Lin Tian is really bold. Before this, he actually killed the commander's son. Pushi smiled bitterly. Xian Yao's eyes lit up. This guy is really interesting. In the other direction, cold sweat broke out on Qin Luo's forehead. She really didn't expect that Lin Tian would actually kill the commander's son. Duan Yen frowned and looked at Sushu. "This is my disciple," Mu Qing said. With that, Mu Qing pulled Sushu behind him. Duan Yen nodded. "So it's Elder Mu's disciple." With that, Duan Yen tilted his head and looked at Zhou He. "What the hell is going on? Is what this girl said true? City Lord, I'm a soldier. Naturally, I have the honor of a soldier." Zhou He's expression was painful, but he straightened his chest. "As a father, I do want to take revenge for my son's death. But as the girl said, Howard was killed in a fair battle of life and death. Although I hate it, I can only endure it. I swear on the honor of the Imperial City that today's matter has nothing to do with me. Otherwise, I'll die a horrible death." Zhou He's words were sonorous and powerful. Coupled with his painful expression, many people fell silent. After Zhou He's words, 3 people walked out of the thousands of soldiers behind him. These 3 people are? Duan Yen frowned. The 3 soldiers knelt down on one knee. Reporting to the city lord, the 3 of us are the people who delivered the letter for the commander. Oh? Tell me what happened. Yes. The 3 of them gave their orders. One of them said, Yesterday, the 3 of us were ordered to go to the commander's residence in Luoyu City to get a letter for Commander Zhou. We traveled through the night and finally arrived at Supervisor Feng's city this morning. However, on the way to the commander's residence, we were stopped by a young man in the middle of the road. He startled our horses and caused us to fall off the backs of our horses. It's fine for us to fall off the horses, but the key point is that the letter was destroyed. City Lord, you know how important the letter is. The 3 of us were furious at that time and subconsciously shouted a few words. We didn't expect that person to really fight. That person is a genius of the martial house. The 3 of us were naturally not his match. Coincidentally, at this time, Qin Ping and the other 2 generals, who often patrolled the streets, passed by here. They wanted to seek justice for the 3 of us, but who would have thought that that person was so arrogant and strong that he actually killed the 3 generals? At this point, the 3 of them shed tears and shouted, City Lord! Lord Commander! Please avenge the 3 generals! Hearing this, the surrounding people were moved. Many people couldn't help but frown. Sushu was furious. She pointed at the 3 of them and said, You're lying! Twisting the truth! Every word of the 3 of us is true. If there's a single lie, may the heavens and earth destroy us! The 3 of them said harshly. At this time, Zhou He stepped forward and looked at Sherdong and Mu Qing. He said, I know that Lin Tian is the most brilliant genius of your martial house this year, but so what? Could it be that just because he was a rare genius, he could do whatever he wanted? Can he kill people as he pleases? Impossible! As he spoke, Zhou He clenched his fists tightly. His face was filled with pain. Chen Ping and the other 2 generals are not only my subordinates and friends, but also soldiers of the Empire who retired from the battlefield. They can't die like this. The culprit must be severely punished. Severely punish the culprit. Severely punish the culprit. Severely punish the culprit. Following Zhou Hao's words, all the soldiers behind him began to shout in unison. With over 1,000 soldiers gathered together and roaring like this, the momentum was truly somewhat terrifying. Looking at this scene, many of the onlookers were moved. In the distance, Puxi and Xian Yao stood together. Xian Yao couldn't help but frown. This Zhou He has some prestige, and his mind is clear. He knows that the strength of a few people isn't enough to negotiate with the 9 Yang martial house. Therefore, he gathered all the soldiers here. At this moment, thousands of soldiers are shouting together, demanding the 9 Yang martial house to hand over the culprit. Even the elders of the martial house will be in a difficult position, Puxi said. What a cunning old fox! Xian Yao snorted. The soldiers roared with great momentum. Each wave was louder than the last. It was shocking. Sherdong and Mu Qing stared at Zhou Hao with sullen faces. They said coldly, You gathered people to threaten us? I don't dare. Zhou He said, Everyone in Fengjian City knows about the martial house's status. Even if I had more guts, I wouldn't dare to threaten the 2 elders. However, the Empire's generals can't be killed for nothing. If I don't punish the culprit because of the martial house's status, wouldn't I disappoint the thousands of soldiers? At this point, Zhou He cupped his fists and bowed 45 degrees. Therefore, if I may be so bold, I ask the 2 elders to hand over the culprit. Elder, please hand over the culprit. Elder, please hand over the culprit. Elder, please hand over the culprit. The soldiers bowed like Zhou He and shouted in unison again. Especially the 3 people who claimed to be the messengers. They shouted the loudest. Sherdong and Mu Qing's faces were ugly. They could reprimand Zhou He, and they couldn't be polite to City Lord Duan Yen. However, they were helpless against thousands of soldiers. Duan Yen frowned. Stop. Duan Yen was the city lord of Fengjian City. With this shout, the thousands of soldiers stopped. After that, Duan Yen looked at Mu Qing and Sherdong. Elders, these soldiers are the subordinates of the three generals. I hope the two elders can understand their feelings. Let's not talk about punishing the culprit for now. Can you let that Lin Tian come out and say a few words? There shouldn't be any problems, right? To be able to sit in the position of the city lord, Duan Yen was naturally not a simple-minded person. When he heard the word, fishy, from Sherdong's mouth and heard Su Shu's words, his heart was slightly suspicious. Zhou He's report was not false. Chen Ping and the other two were indeed killed by Lin Tian. However, Duan Yen was very clear about Sherdong and Mu Qing's character. Since Sherdong said the word, fishy, coupled with Su Shu's words, there might be more to it than meets the eye. After thinking about it, Duan Yen decided to make a choice. He would let Lin Tian come out and make a decision after that. Sherdong frowned. He wanted to say something, but Mu Qing pulled him back. Su Shu, call Lin Tian over. Mu Qing said. Since Duan Yen had already taken a step back, if they continued to refuse, wouldn't it seem like they had a guilty conscience? Su Shu coldly snorted and glared at Zhou He. Then, she ran towards Lin Tian's residence. Zhou He's eyes flashed with a sinister light. Lin Tiansha had indeed killed Chen Ping and the other two. Even if Sherdong and the others guessed that there was something fishy about today's matter, so what? As long as he stubbornly refused to admit it, what could these people do? The commander of Luoyu City was his good friend for many years. The three soldiers kneeling in front of him would definitely not offend him for a martial house disciple. They would definitely stand on his side. Even if Sherdong and the others wanted to investigate, there was nothing they could do. As such, as long as he called Lin Tian out, with the help of thousands of soldiers, the martial house would not have to worry about not handing over the culprit. Within the martial house, Lin Tian walked out of his residence and headed towards the martial pavilion. His divine pulse realm cultivation had completely stabilized. He had also finished cultivating the remaining 30% of the Azure Thunder Sword art. He was prepared to go to the martial pavilion to choose an inferior divine pulse realm martial technique. Speaking of which, the highest level martial technique in the Nine Yang martial house is the inferior divine pulse martial technique. Lin Tian muttered to himself. Thinking about it, Lin Tian's eyes flashed. After a while, the Nine Yang martial house would not be able to satisfy him. If he wanted to walk further on the martial path, he would have to go to a higher place. Imperial City, Northern Flame Imperial Courtyard, Lin Tian murmured. Taking a deep breath, Lin Tian shook his head. The most important thing now was to increase his strength. After all, according to Luo Xiao, entering the Northern Flame Imperial Courtyard was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. Lin Tian. A voice sounded from the front. Su Shu ran towards him. Chapter 101. Seeing Su Shu's panting appearance, Lin Tian felt a little strange. Why are you in such a hurry? Lin Tian asked. Su Shu's eyes widened. Why am I in such a hurry? Take a guess. Lin Tian blushed with shame. This girl's appearance was a little fierce. All right, what happened? Why are you in such a hurry? Lin Tian straightened his attitude. Su Shu sighed. What can happen? Zhou He and the city lord are here. They are asking the martial house for you. Master asked me to call you over. Lin Tianwei was stunned. Then he smiled. They really came. He narrowed his eyes. Of course. Look at the trouble you've caused. Su Shu was slightly angry. Then, her face darkened. She leaned closer to Lin Tian and whispered. Go back quickly. Take Lin Shi and leave quietly. Ah? Lin Tianyi was stunned. What ah? I told you to run away. Su Shu said. It can't be that bad, right? What do you mean it can't be that bad? Do you think this matter can be compared to the previous one? You killed the general of the empire. Even if we know there's a conspiracy, we can't do anything. We can't produce any evidence. As long as Zhou He insists that you killed Chenping and the other two, you will definitely be taken away and beheaded in the end. Even if the martial house wants to protect you, it's impossible. Su Shu said angrily. It doesn't matter if you die. I don't want to see Lin Shi sad. Hurry up and leave. Lin Tianyi smiled. If I leave like this, how will you explain it to your master? Master is a good person. He won't blame me. On the contrary, he will praise me. Su Shu snorted. Lin Tian smiled. He looked at Su Shu and felt touched. This girl was really good to him. Let's go, he said and walked out of the martial house. Hey. I told you to take Lin Shi away. Why are you running over there? Su Shu tugged at Lin Tian. If I really leave like this, wouldn't it be too immoral? Lin Tian stretched out her hand and gently flicked Su Shu's forehead. She said with a smile, Didn't I borrow spirit coins from you before? You asked me what they were for, and I told you it was a secret. You were quite dissatisfied. I'll let you see my so-called secret today. Ah? Su Shu was slightly stunned. Lin Tian smiled and pulled Su Shu towards the martial house's main entrance. Hey. You bastard. Su Shu was furious. Outside the Nine-Yang martial house, thousands of soldiers were gathered together. Duan Yen and Zhou He stood at the front, while Shidong and Mu Qing stood at the entrance of the martial house with solemn faces. For a moment, the atmosphere was very tense. All around, the onlookers looked at each other in dismay. The silence was shocking. At this moment, a young man and a young woman walked out of the martial house. He's out. In the distance, a smile appeared on Pushi's face. Xian Yao stared at the martial house and saw Lin Tian walking over while holding Su Shu's hand. She curled her lips and said, Womanizer. At the side, Pushi couldn't help but feel embarrassed for Lin Tian. How could she say that? At this moment, everyone's eyes fell on Lin Tian. It's him. In front of the thousands of soldiers, the 3 soldiers who rode on their horses in the morning pointed at Lin Tian and shouted. Zhou He's eyes flashed with a sinister light. Evil thief! Duan Yen looked at Lin Tian and sized him up seriously, but he didn't say anything. Lin Tian let go of Su Shu's hand and came to Mu Qing and Shidong's side. He bowed and said, Greetings to the 2 elders. Mu Qing nodded. Su Shu should have told you the details, right? Yes, elder. Lin Tian ondao. Then I'll leave it to you for the time being. Relax, the martial house will definitely stand by your side. Mu Qing said. On the side, Shidong also smiled and nodded to Lin Tian Wei. Lin Tian's heart warmed and he bowed again. Thank you, elders. Mu Qing and Shidong really treated him well. Standing up straight, Lin Tian's expression was calm. He took a step forward and looked at Duan Yen and Zhou He. For me, you made a big fuss. Facing thousands of soldiers, facing the city lord, facing the commander, he didn't feel the slightest pressure. Duan Yen frowned slightly when he saw Lin Tian's expression. This youth was clearly only 16 years old, but when faced with him, the city lord and over 1,000 soldiers, he actually had an indifferent expression. This made him feel that it was a little strange. You are Lin Tian? Tell me, why did you kill people? Do you know how big of a crime it is? Duan Yen said in a deep voice. Lin Tian glanced at Duan Yen and didn't say a word. His gaze fell on Zhou He. Commander Zhou, I killed your son Zhou Hao in a fair battle to the death. You must be very dissatisfied and hate me very much. However, using the life of an imperial general as a stepping stone for your revenge is a bit too much. Lin Tiantan said calmly. As soon as these words came out, everyone was stunned. What? Many people stared at Lin Tian, then at Zhou He, and finally at Lin Tian. Zhou He gathered thousands of soldiers to capture Lin Tian, but now, Lin Tian actually turned the tables and questioned Zhou He. This made everyone's expression strange. On the other side, Duan Yen was originally dissatisfied with Lin Tian's attitude of ignoring him, but when he heard Lin Tian's words he was stunned. What's wrong with this boy? This guy. At the back, Su Shu's eyes widened. Why does it seem like Lin Tian came to interrogate Zhou He? Zhou He's face darkened, and his eyes became even colder. Lin Tian, don't be jealous of my noble heart with your petty heart. You killed 3 generals of the Empire on the street. This is an unforgivable crime. You should be punished with death by 1,000 cuts. Hearing this, many people gasped. Death by 1,000 cuts was what people called death by 1,000 cuts. It was extremely cruel. Lin Tian looked at Zhou He. After a while, he smiled faintly. No wonder Zhou He was so hypocritical. After seeing you, I understand. You are indeed from the same origin. You. Zhou He's face darkened. Although Lin Tian's words were calm, the sarcasm in them was clear to everyone. Murderer! At this moment, an angry voice rang out. One of the 3 who claimed to be the messenger spoke. He stared at Lin Tian with hatred. It's you! Not only did you destroy the letter we brought back from Luohua City, but you also attacked us. You even killed 3 generals. You will die a horrible death. You will die a horrible death. Beside him, the other 2 shouted, their faces full of anger. Moreover, almost at the same time, several tens of people walked out from the thousands of soldiers. These people were precisely the elites that Chen Ping led in the morning. Right now, they all pointed at Lin Tian, and there were even some who took off their clothes, revealing their wounds. These wounds were left by him, someone said hatefully. Dozens of people stood at the front, their bodies all covered in bruises. They were either on their chests, backs, or abdomens. All of them were very serious, to the extent that many of them had broken bones in their arms and legs. They looked very sorrowful. Seeing this scene, many of the onlookers were moved. How cruel! Someone whispered. Even Sherdong and Mu Qing couldn't help but frown. They subconsciously looked at Lin Tianyi. Duan Yan's face darkened. Lin Tian, they were injured by you. Staring at Lin Tian, Duan Yan's voice had a hint of sternness. They were injured by me, Lin Tian said indifferently. Hearing Lin Tian's words, many of the onlookers were stunned. Originally, these people thought that Lin Tian would at least deny it. They didn't expect him to admit it so easily. Duan Yan's face darkened. Chen Ping and the other 2 were killed by you. Yes. Lin Tian nodded. His voice was still calm. The crowd was stunned. Wasn't this admission too straightforward? Even Sherdong and Mu Qing frowned. Su Shu was so angry that she almost pounced on him and bit him. This guy, he doesn't want to refute. In the distance, Xian Yao was puzzled. Only Pushi had a calm expression. He smiled and said, Miss, just keep watching. Xian Yao's expression was strange, but she still looked forward. In front of the martial house, Duan Yan's expression was even more severe. There was even a trace of coldness. Since you have admitted to both, what else is there to say? Do you plead guilty? Plead guilty? I don't think I am guilty, Lin Tian said indifferently. You. Duan Yan's body emitted a trace of coldness. Lin Tian's attitude was too bad. City Lord Duan, don't release coldness and true yuan at will. Lin Tian's expression was calm. As the city lord, before you convict me, I think you should investigate in detail. Investigation? What investigation is there? Everything has been investigated clearly, Duan Yan said coldly. Is that so? I don't think so. Lin Tiantan smiled faintly. He looked at the 3 ordinary soldiers in front of him and said, They claimed that they were ordered by Zhou He to retrieve a letter of war from the Luoyu city's commander, but I destroyed it. I wonder if the city lord went to Luoyu city and asked the Luoyu city's commander if this was true? This? Duan Yan frowned. Lin Tiantan smiled. It seems that he didn't. Duan Yan's face turned green. He felt that Lin Tian's smile was very uncomfortable. At this moment, Zhou He opened his mouth and said, City Lord! Since this evil thief wants to make a final struggle, then we will let him die wholeheartedly. This subordinate will send someone to Luoyu City and ask the Luoyu City's commander to verify. Zhou He sneered in his heart. The Luoyu City's commander was his good friend for many years. Naturally, he would help him. Duan Yan frowned slightly. All right, let's do it this way. Even though he felt that it was a little troublesome, this matter involved the 9 young martial house. In front of Mu Qing and Sherdong, he felt that it was best to satisfy them. At the same time, this would satisfy all the onlookers and make Lin Tian wholeheartedly admit his guilt. Zhou He nodded and glanced coldly at Lin Tian. He said to the 3 ordinary soldiers in the afternoon, "You guys have traveled between Luoyu City and Fengjian City many times. You are most familiar with the official roads. Go and return quickly." "Yes," the 3 of them responded. After they finished speaking, the 3 of them stood up and ran out of the city. "Wait." At this moment, Lin Tian's voice sounded. Zhou He stared at Lin Tian and sneered. "Why? Are you feeling guilty?" Lin Tian didn't even look at Zhou He. His gaze landed on Duan Yen as he said indifferently, "City Lord Duan, let me ask you a question. If the Empire's generals or ordinary soldiers deceive and disobey the Empire's great general, what is the punishment?" Duan Yen frowned. He cupped his fists and saluted to the sky. He said solemnly, "The old general has been on the battlefield for dozens of years. He has assisted the 3 emperors of Beiyan country. He has also blocked the enemy's army countless times and protected the peace of Beiyan country. The previous emperor once said that when the empire's soldiers see the great general, it is equivalent to seeing him. If there is a soldier who dares to deceive and disobey the old general, it will be the same punishment as disobeying the emperor's authority. 9 generations will be executed." All around, everyone looked at him with respect. To Beiyan country, the old general meant a lot. "But there is another question." Duan Yen looked coldly at Lin Tian. "No." Lin Tian smiled. His right hand moved slightly, and a palm-sized golden token suddenly appeared in his right hand. Looking at the 3 ordinary soldiers who were preparing to leave for Luoyu City, he said indifferently, "You guys take this to Luoyu City's commander-in-chief." End of chapter. Chapter 102. The golden token was very small, but it gave people an extremely majestic feeling, shining brightly in the sun. The 3 ordinary soldiers followed Lin Tian's voice and looked over, and their faces suddenly changed. At the same time, Duan Yen, the city lord, and Zhou He, the commander, both changed their expressions. Especially Zhou He, his eyes were already filled with horror, as if he had seen the most terrible thing. Behind them, thousands of soldiers were also horrified. "What, you don't recognize this thing?" Lin Tian narrowed his eyes. Duan Yen trembled and was the first to kneel down. "Greetings, General!" As Duan Yen knelt down, Zhou He and thousands of soldiers knelt down one by one. "Greetings, General!" Loud shouts resounded throughout the wilderness. In front of the martial mansion, a group of people immediately knelt down. Many people were even trembling. This is, General. General's deputy order. What is this?" Everyone was collectively petrified. General's deputy order, seeing this order was equivalent to seeing the general of the empire. So Duan Yen and Zhou He led the crowd here to interrogate the general of the empire? Thinking of this, everyone felt a chill down their spines. In the crowd, Xian Yao stared. How could this guy have such a thing? Of course it's the old general who sent it. Pushi smiled. Seeing this scene, Qin Luo trembled with excitement. She never thought that Lin Tian would control the general's deputy order. With this order, even the city lord had to bow to him. Now, the Qin family and Lin Tian were in a cooperative relationship, and the general's deputy order was in Lin Tian's hands. This was absolutely a great thing for the Qin family. Family head! We were all confused before. You're so smart! Next to them, the higher-ups of the Qin family were very excited. Of course! Qin Luo snorted. Qin Luo was so happy that she trembled with excitement, but some people couldn't be happy no matter what. How could this be? How could it be? Mo Hai growled. At the same time, the Mo family disciples next to him were all terrified. With the general's deputy order, it was equivalent to the old general coming in person. Except for the current emperor and the princes, everyone had to bow to him. The person who held this token could even mobilize a sizable army of the imperial capital. Think about it, what would happen if Lin Tian mobilized an army? He could flatten the Mo clan in an instant. How could this be? How could this be? The group of Mo clan disciples mumbled to themselves. Everyone began to tremble. The Mo clan had actually provoked such a fiend. At this moment, everyone inside and outside the martial palace was stunned. Even Mu Qing and Sherdong were shocked. The old general's token? This? Sherdong frowned. Mu Qing gazed at Sushu and said, "Little girl, what's going on? How did he get the old general's token?" Sushu and Lin Tianyi were very close, so Mu Qing felt that Sushu might know something. Well, I don't know either. If I knew that he had this thing, I wouldn't be worried about him. Sushu was also stunned. Suddenly, she thought of what Lin Tian had said to her before. She couldn't help but say to herself, "This is the so-called secret? But what does this have to do with borrowing spirit coins from me?" At this moment, all the onlookers were completely stunned. He's just a disciple of the martial palace. How could he have the old general's token? It shouldn't be. That's right. It's too strange. Many people were puzzled. At this moment, an extremely smart person thought of something and his face suddenly changed. Wait. About 2 months ago, the Array Manipulator Guild released a sensational news. A mysterious genius array manipulator was born in the city. He was only 16 years old, but he already had the ability to control a third-order array. Moreover, it was rumored that the old general had received a favor from that mysterious array manipulator. If the old general wanted to express his gratitude, he gave him the deputy general's token. This person didn't finish his sentence. It was only a guess, but it was like a stone that caused 1,000 ripples. Instantly, most of the onlookers' faces changed. There was indeed such a thing. At that time, the old general's granddaughter was on the verge of death. That mysterious array manipulator pulled the old general's granddaughter back from the gates of hell. Another person said, "It is rumored that the old general is almost 90 years old, but his granddaughter is his only family member. He loves her the most." That mysterious array manipulator saved the old general's only family member, so the old general temporarily gave him the deputy general's token. It is very possible. They're both 16 years old, and he has the deputy general's token. Could it be he is that genius array manipulator? Oh my God! Everyone was stunned. Listening to these voices, many disciples in the martial palace were shocked. They looked at Lin Tian as if they were looking at a monster. He's that mysterious array manipulator? How is that possible? I don't believe it either. But how do you explain the deputy general's token? All the disciples in the martial palace were shocked. A third-order array manipulator. This was even more shocking than Lin Tian controlling the deputy general's token. An array manipulator. This kind of person's status in the Northern Flame country was shockingly high. They had endless means and were the target of all forces. For an array manipulator, wealth and power were easily obtainable. At this moment, even Mu Qing and Sherdong couldn't help but stare again. "Girl, you don't know about the token, but what about this? Do you know?" Mu Qing asked. Beside her, Sherdong also looked at Sushu in shock. It is said that the cultivation of an array manipulator is very difficult. It requires a lot of spirit coins. Lin Tian, he should, Sushu said, and suddenly her eyes widened. Wait a minute, this guy borrowed 1,000 spirit coins from me 2 months ago and then returned it quickly. After that, he seemed to be very rich. Could it be? Mu Qing sighed. That's it. He must have just started learning the art of array manipulation. After he mastered it, spirit coins were nothing to him. Thinking about it this way, the rumor about the genius array manipulator 2 months ago should be him. Also, the fact that he has the deputy general's token can be explained. As he spoke, Mu Qing and Sherdong looked at each other, and a bright light flashed in their eyes. It seems that our guess is correct. Sherdong sucked in a deep breath and said, A 16-year-old Tier 3 array manipulation master, this has never appeared in history. To be able to nurture him to such a level at such a young age, this little fellow's teacher must be extraordinary. Teacher? What teacher? Sushu was puzzled. Mu Qing was helpless. Girl, you forgot one thing. If he wants to learn the art of array manipulation, the consumption of money is only a side problem. The most important thing is that he needs a high-level array manipulator to guide him and pass down the array patterns. Otherwise, even if he has supreme talent in array manipulation, he can forget about becoming a qualified array manipulator. This means that this guy. Sushu stared. Yes, that little guy has an expert behind him. Mu Qing said. Actually, your martial Uncle Sure and I have already guessed this. After all, when that little guy just entered the martial house, he already had amazing martial skills. Even my strongest martial skill can't compare to his. Sushu was stunned. She then fiercely gritted her teeth. This guy. His background is quite big. Mu Qing and the other two were shocked. Outside the martial house, Mo Hai's family was even more terrified. Is he really that array manipulator? How can it be? No, it can't be. Almost everyone in Fengjian City knew about the rumor 2 months ago. After all, a third-order array manipulator was too shocking. And now, this shocking and mysterious array manipulator might actually be Lin Tian, a great enemy of their family that they had provoked. At this moment, the Mo family's disciples felt their heads become heavy. At this moment, inside and outside the martial house, everyone's eyes were focused on Lin Tian. Standing in front of the thousands of soldiers, Lin Tian's expression was calm from beginning to end. He didn't seem to see the thousands of kneeling soldiers at all. Instead, he looked at the 3 commanders who were preparing to go to Luoyu City and said, What are you waiting for? Can't you understand my words? Come here and take this thing to Luoyu City's commander. The 3 soldiers suddenly trembled and couldn't move their feet. At this moment, Lin Tian's voice sounded again. He was still very calm. Forget it, I'll go with you. After all, this thing is not simple. If you accidentally lose it, I won't be able to explain it to the old general. As he spoke, he stepped forward and looked down at the 3 people. Get up and lead the way. The 3 soldiers trembled even more violently, and their bodies couldn't stop shaking. At the same time, the dozens of elites who walked out from the group of soldiers also trembled. Get up. Lin Tian looked at the 3 people and raised his voice. There was obviously a trace of coldness in his voice. It was only 2 words, but it was like a clap of thunder exploding in everyone's ears. The 3 soldiers trembled even more violently. Finally, one of them couldn't take it anymore. He knelt on the ground and kowtowed to Lin Tian. Sir, please spare my life. Please spare my life. Seeing this person speak, the other 2 didn't dare to hesitate and knelt together. Please spare my life, sir. For a time, the same voice came out from the 3 people's mouths. Spare your life? Lin Tian swept a glance at the group of people kneeling and sneered. You gathered here today to take my life. How can the words spare my life come out of your mouths? No matter how you look at it, I should be the one saying it. The 3 soldiers trembled, their faces pale as if they were smeared with flour. This lowly one doesn't dare. This lowly one has eyes but failed to see. This lowly one deserves to die. Please spare my life, sir. The 3 of them fearfully glanced at Zhou He, who was standing not too far away, and said in a trembling voice, The war letter is fake. Everything that happened today was ordered by the Lord Commander. The Lord Commander wants to avenge young Master Zhou, so he ordered people to watch you from outside the martial house. As long as you walk out of the martial house, we. The 3 people's lips trembled. In the end, they couldn't even speak because of the extreme fear. Seeing the commander's deputy was the same as seeing the general. Deceiving the general was a crime punishable by death. The 3 people were scared. They were so scared that their bodies trembled. End of chapter. Chapter 103. As soon as the three of them spoke, the faces of the people inside and outside the martial house changed. Although the three of them did not speak clearly due to their fear, just a few words were enough for everyone here to deduce the truth of the matter. Everything was a conspiracy. A conspiracy by the Commander-in-Chief Zhou He. Mu Qing and Sherdong coldly snorted as they stared at Zhou He with gloomy faces. Zhou He! Is this true? Duan Yen angrily said. Zhou He trembled and his face became incomparably pale. Just as he was about to defend himself, the dozens of elite soldiers on the other side begged for mercy like the three ordinary soldiers and kept kowtowing. Lin Tian now had the Vice-Commander-in-Chief, which was equivalent to the Commander-in-Chief himself. How could these soldiers dare to continue lying? With the Deputy General's order in hand, it was not difficult for Lin Tian to find out the truth of this matter. If they continued to lie, they would be punished for the crime of disobeying the Emperor's authority. This was a crime that could implicate 9 generations of their family. Sir, please spare our lives. We were just following orders. This was the Commander-in-Chief's order. We had no other choice. Please have mercy. The group of soldiers kowtowed incessantly. Listening to these people's voices, Zhou He's face became paler and paler. His body kept trembling. He never thought that Lin Tian would have the Vice-Commander-in-Chief. With this Vice-Commander-in-Chief in hand, who would dare to continue helping him? Although the Commander-in-Chief of Luoyu City had been good friends with him for many years, he wouldn't dare to lie when it involved 9 generations of his family. Very good, Mu Qing coldly said. Sherdong stared at Zhou He and coldly said, I warned you before, but I didn't expect you to be so bold. After failing to assassinate my disciple, you took the opportunity to frame him and gathered people to my martial house. You're really impressive as a Commander-in-Chief. Shameless! Shameless! Push him out and kill him! In the martial house, many disciples angrily said. Most of them were new disciples. These new disciples admired Lin Tian very much. Zhou He had framed Lin Tian and even gathered a crowd to cause trouble in the martial house. He had completely disregarded the prestige of the martial house. Now that the truth had been revealed, and compared to Zhou He's previous arrogance and hypocrisy, these martial house disciples were extremely angry. Over 1,000 soldiers knelt on the ground. Some of them raised their heads and stared at Zhou He with ugly expressions. Most of these people did not know the truth. They really thought that Chen Ping and the other 2 were innocently and unilaterally killed by Lin Tian. When they heard that Zhou He had ordered them to come here and denounce the murderer, many of the soldiers still respected Zhou He. After all, the status of the 9 young martial house was not ordinary. How could ordinary people dare to openly ask for people from the martial house? The soldiers were proud to have such a commander. However, at this moment, when the truth was revealed, anger appeared in the eyes of these soldiers. It turned out that everything was a scheme planned by Zhou He. Chen Ping's group of 3 were merely Zhou He's tools for revenge, and they were also being used by him. Damn it! A soldier muttered angrily in a low voice. Inside and outside the martial palace, almost everyone was staring at Zhou He. Some were staring at him with disdain, and some were angry. Facing these gazes and hearing the harsh discussions, Zhou He's face turned paler and paler. His body trembled uncontrollably. He felt as if the entire world was spinning. Lin Tian looked at Zhou He with a calm expression. Commander-in-Chief, what do you think now? Zhou He trembled, but he couldn't say a single word. You can ask for confirmation, a thorough investigation, or even report to the imperial family. Lin Tian continued. Zhou He lowered his head and trembled uncontrollably. He couldn't say a single word. Lin Tian smiled indifferently. It seems like you have nothing to say. Then, what are your crimes? Let me calculate them for you. First, abuse of power. Second, deceiving your superiors. Third, gathering people to disturb the peace of the martial house. Fourth, framing the holder of the Deputy General's order. Guess what kind of crimes you will be charged with? Zhou He trembled. His face was completely pale, and he was completely dazed. Lin Tian stared at Zhou He, and his expression suddenly turned cold. From now on, you will be stripped of your position as the commander-in-chief of Fengjian City. Tilting his head, Lin Tian looked at Duan Yen. City Lord Duan, I don't need to teach you what to do next, right? Yes, yes, yes. Duan Yen nodded repeatedly, and a few drops of cold sweat rolled down his forehead. Lin Tian snorted. Get up. After he finished speaking, he put away the Deputy General's order, and it disappeared in a flash. This strange scene caused many people in the surroundings to be astonished. Even Sushu was no exception, and her eyes widened. Stone ring? This little guy actually has such a good thing. Mu Qing muttered to himself. Lin Tian put away the Deputy General's order and took a step back, standing at the side with his hands behind his back. Duan Yen stood up from the ground and bowed to Lin Tian. Then, he tilted his head and stared at Zhou He and the dozens of soldiers who were involved. His face was ashen and cold. Men, arrest all of them! Yes! Very quickly, Zhou He and the dozens of soldiers who were involved in this matter were imprisoned. Zhou He trembled. Although his cultivation was strong, he didn't dare to resist. Because in this place, Duan Yen, Mu Qing, and Sherdong were all stronger than him. It would be easy for them to suppress him, and his resistance would be meaningless. As for the dozens of ordinary soldiers, their faces were filled with fear as they begged for mercy. Take them away! Duan Yen shouted. Instantly, a group of soldiers obeyed the order and brought the dazed Zhou He and the others away. Many people in the surroundings looked at this scene and couldn't help but look at each other in dismay. Zhou He led a group of soldiers in an aggressive manner, but who would have thought that it would end up like this? Serves them right. Sushu snorted. Outside the martial palace, there were still many soldiers kneeling on the ground, and they didn't dare to get up. Duan Yen bowed to Lin Tian and knelt on one knee. Duan Yan's subordinates were not good enough. Please forgive us. Please forgive us, Lord. In an instant, the group of soldiers behind Duan Yen spoke in unison. Lin Tian glanced at the soldiers kneeling on the ground and his gaze landed on Duan Yen. Forget it, all of you get up. Although he wasn't happy in his heart, Duan Yen was deceived and his actions weren't too overboard. Naturally, he wouldn't be calculative. Thank you, Lord. Duan Yen said gratefully and stood up. Thank you, Lord. The soldiers behind Duan Yen said in unison. Then, they stood up carefully and straightened their backs. However, many of their faces were still pale. Duan Yen stood at the side. He was the city lord of Fengjian City, but he didn't know what to do at this moment. He glanced at Lin Tian from time to time, as if he was waiting for Lin Tian's orders. Lin Tian swept his gaze over Duan Yen. Enough, City Lord Duan, my matter ends here. You take these soldiers and disperse, don't affect the order of the city, and don't affect the cultivation of the martial palace disciples. As for what to do next, you should know what to do. After a pause, Lin Tian said, disperse the crowd. Duan Yen nodded quickly and turned around to give the order. After that, Duan Yen took a few steps forward and cupped his fists at Mu Qing and Sherdong. He said with an awkward expression, Elder Mu, Elder Shi, I'm really sorry about today's matter. I've disturbed the peace of the martial palace. I ask for the two elders' forgiveness. Enough, quickly take your people and leave. Sherdong waved his hand. Yes, 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 we'll leave now, Duan Yen said. Saying that, Duan Yen bowed to Lin Tian and left with the soldiers. At the same time, Duan Yen also left some soldiers behind to disperse the crowd outside the martial palace. Many of the spectators left while looking back at Lin Tian from time to time. This young man is amazing! Amazing! Many people were shocked from the beginning to the end. Of course, there were also some people who were pale, such as Mo Hai and the Mo family disciples. How could this be? Mo Hai muttered. The Mo family disciples were also dumbfounded. They were terrified and left like walking corpses. Soon, the space outside the martial palace became empty. Lin Tian spat out a mouthful of turbid air. He finally understood everything about Zhou Hao. Little brother. At this moment, a slightly charming voice floated in the air. In the distance, Xian Yao walked over. Her long black dress outlined her figure perfectly, making one feel nervous. Lin Tian looked in the direction of the voice and suddenly felt a headache coming. This seductress actually came. Miss Xian. Lin Tian smiled. From the moment he took out the general's deputy order, Lin Tian knew that his identity was completely exposed. After all, Pu Shi knew about the general's deputy order, and since Pu Shi knew about it, Xian Yao naturally knew about it too. Of course, what he didn't know was that Xian Yao had already found out about his true identity. Didn't you say to call me elder sister? Xian Yao said angrily. Lin Tianyi blushed with shame. When did he say such words? Pu Shi followed behind Xian Yao and came to Lin Tian's side. He smiled and said, Little brother Lin Tian, this is the first time we've met. Lin Tian was a little embarrassed and said, I didn't mean to hide it. Please forgive me, Elder Pu. It's fine. Everyone has their own desires. It's nothing. Pu Shi smiled. Then, Pu Shi raised his head and looked at Mu Qing and Sherdong. Two elders, how have you been? As a respected figure in Fengjian City, although Pu Shi didn't have much interaction with Mu Qing and Sherdong, both sides still knew each other. Mu Qing smiled and said, We're all good. How about brother Pu Shi? Mu Qing and Sherdong were a little surprised that Lin Tian and Pu Shi knew each other. Of course, although it was strange, they didn't ask much. Beside Mu Qing, Su Shu stared at Lin Tian, then at Xian Yao. Finally, her gaze fell on Lin Tian. Her eyes widened as she said, Hey! Who is she? Not only Su Shu, but at this time, all the disciples of the martial house were staring at Xian Yao. Especially some of the male disciples, they were stunned. Some of them even swallowed their saliva. Lin Tian noticed these people's eyes and couldn't help but curse in his heart. He looked at Su Shu and was about to introduce Xian Yao, but he didn't expect Xian Yao to hold his arm in front of everyone. She put on a very affectionate look and said to Su Shu, We're friends, the very close kind. Lin Tian. Su Shu's eyes widened as she stared at Lin Tian angrily. Shameless! Su Shu kicked Lin Tianyi's leg hard and turned around to leave in a huff. Chapter 104. Remember the literature building in a second, providing you with wonderful novels to read. Seeing Su Shu leave in a huff, Lin Tian suddenly blushed with shame. The little girl is jealous. Xian Yao covered her mouth and snickered. Her actions were even more charming, causing the disciples of the martial house to drool. Many of them looked at Lin Tian with envious and jealous expressions because Xian Yao's attitude towards Lin Tian was somewhat ambiguous. Lin Tian was speechless. This girl's lethality towards men was too great. Pu Shi coughed and reminded, Miss, please mind your words and actions. Xian Yao rolled her eyes and released Lin Tian's arm, moving away from Lin Tian's side. Lin Tian let out a sigh of relief and looked at Pu Shi gratefully. He really didn't know how to deal with this seductive girl. He only felt that it was more difficult than fighting the four extreme demonic beasts. Pu Shi smiled and said, All right, little brother. It's good that you're fine. Miss and I will return to the Yi-Bao Pavilion first. Remember to come visit when you're free. Sure, I will. Lin Tian nodded. Pu Shi tilted his head and looked at Mu Qing and Sherdong. Two elders, sorry for disturbing you. Goodbye. Don't mention it. Brother Pu Shi, take care. Mu Qing smiled. Pu Shi turned around and nodded at Lin Tian, calling Xian Yao to leave together. This was the Nine-Yang martial house. It was inconvenient for him and Xian Yao to stand here. Pu Shi guessed that Mu Qing and Sherdong had something to ask Lin Tian. Good little brother, you must come and play with big sister when you're free. Xian Yao said sweetly, causing the jealous gazes gathered on Lin Tian to become even more intense. Lin Tian was speechless. This girl was too good at drawing hatred for him. If it wasn't for his strength, the surrounding male disciples would have eaten him alive. Soon, Pu Shi and Xian Yao left, and could no longer be seen. Only then did Mu Qing look at Lin Tian. She paused and said, "Little guy, come with us." After saying that, Mu Qing and Sherdong turned around and walked towards the disciples' pavilion. Lin Tian naturally knew that Mu Qing and Sherdong had a lot of questions for him, so he didn't hesitate and immediately followed behind them. Not long after, following the two of them, Lin Tian arrived at a room on the third floor of the disciples' pavilion. Coincidentally, on the way here, the three of them happened to meet an angry Sushu. Thus, Sushu followed along. "Sit anywhere." Mu Qing smiled. After saying that, Mu Qing and Sherdong sat down. Lin Tian didn't refuse and chose a chair nearby to sit down. "Humph!" Sushu snorted and glared at Lin Tian. Lin Tian. This girl was acting as if he had done something wrong to her. Mu Qing and Sherdong looked at Sushu's angry expression and couldn't help smiling. "That's enough, Su girl. If you have any dissatisfaction, you can vent it out with him alone later. Now, put away those big round eyes of yours. If you keep staring, they'll fall out." Sherdong teased. Sushu was angry and embarrassed. She snorted and also found a chair to sit down. Only then did Mu Qing open her mouth and look at Lin Tian Dao. "Little guy, some time ago, the genius array manipulator in Feng Administrative City was really you?" Hearing this, Sushu immediately pricked up her ears. Lin Tian nodded and said, "It's me." Since he had already taken out the general's deputy order, Lin Tian knew that he couldn't hide the fact that he was an array manipulator. "It's really you?" Sushu stared at him. Lin Tian nodded. "It's indeed me. 3 months ago, you asked me to borrow 1,000 spirit coins just to practice the array manipulator technique?" "Yes, it's like this." Sushu continued to stare at Lin Tian. "You're really at the 3rd stage?" "Barely." Lin Tian smiled. Sushu stared at Lin Tian in disbelief. Although she had already confirmed that Lin Tian was the mysterious array manipulator in front of the Marshall House, she was still shocked when she heard Lin Tian's answer. A 16-year-old divine vein realm expert and a 3rd stage array manipulator. This was simply too crazy. How could he be so monstrous? One had to know that the conditions for array manipulator technique were extremely harsh. It was 100 times harder than martial Dao cultivators. Ordinary array manipulators were at least 27 or 28 years old and were only at the primary array manipulator technique. But now, Lin Tian was only 16 years old and had already reached the 3rd stage array manipulator technique. This was simply too shocking. "You bastard!" Sushu ground her teeth. She had an expression as if she wanted to bite Lin Tian. Mu Qing and Sherdong were already mentally prepared. Although they were surprised, it wasn't as obvious as Sushu's. After a pause, Mu Qing and Sherdong glanced at each other. Their expressions suddenly became serious as they looked at Lin Tian Dao. "There's one more thing. Little guy, you should have a powerful teacher behind you, right?" This. Lin Tianwei paused for a moment and frowned. Lin Tian didn't know when Mu Qing and Sherdong had thought that he had a powerful teacher behind him. However, he already knew that Pu Shi had such a guess. After all, as an array manipulator, it was impossible for him to learn without a teacher. It was also at that time that he had already prepared an excuse. At this moment, when Mu Qing asked this question, although he was surprised, he didn't find it strange. The reason why he frowned was just for show. Mu Qing seemed to see Lin Tian's hesitation and said, "Little guy, you can rest assured. This is a place where only the Marshall House's elders can come. No one will hear what we say here. As for the 3 of us, you can rest assured that we won't do anything to harm you." Lin Tian thought for a moment and replied, "Yes." Mu Qing and Sherdong glanced at each other. Their eyes flashed with a deep light. On the other side, Sushu's eyes widened. "There really is a teacher?" "There really is." Sushu continued to ask, "When did this happen?" "More than 3 months ago." "Lin Tian now?" Sherdong asked. "Was it after the Lin family's old residence was burned down?" Lin Tian nodded. "Yes, the last of the Lin family's old residences was burned down by the Mo family's servants. I took Lin Shi and fled to the mountains outside Fengjian City. There, I met my teacher and received his cultivation method and array manipulation technique. Lin Tian had obtained the 4 extreme scriptures at that time. Therefore, it was the most appropriate time to make up the timeline. Sure enough, Mu Qing sighed. This was exactly as they had guessed. After a pause, Mu Qing's expression became solemn again as he asked, "Little guy, may I ask, what is your teacher's name?" Lin Tian was such a monstrous genius. Mu Qing and Sherdong really wanted to know who Lin Tian's teacher was. On the side, Sushu also held her breath as she stared at Lin Tian without blinking, waiting for Lin Tian's answer. "This?" Lin Tian revealed a troubled expression and said, "I'm sorry, senior. To be honest, I don't know this either. Master only taught me the technique and didn't tell me his real name. He only said that when I reach the knowledge sea stage, he will come find me again." After leaving this sentence, Master disappeared. I don't know how he left. Hearing this, Mu Qing and Sherdong's expressions changed. "Did that person really say that he would come to find you after you reached the knowledge sea realm?" Mu Qing asked. "That's what he said," Lin Tian replied. Mu Qing and Sherdong looked at each other and couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. "What's wrong, senior?" Lin Tian asked. Mu Qing smiled bitterly. "This teacher of yours is amazing. He only came to find you after reaching the knowledge sea realm. This shows that the knowledge sea realm is the only realm that truly meets the requirements of his personal disciple. Such a person is conservatively estimated to be a powerhouse in the airborne realm. He might even have surpassed the airborne realm. That is a legendary figure." Hearing this, Sushu and Lin Tian were both shocked. "There are higher realms after the airborne realm?" Lin Tian was surprised. Mu Qing nodded and said, "There are, but I don't know what the level after the airborne realm is like. After all, that is a legendary level. It is not something that people like us can come into contact with." This, Lin Tian was stunned. There were higher realms after the airborne realm? However, Lin Tian was slightly stunned and then relieved. Thinking about it, the 9 people who appeared in his mind at that time seemed to be far beyond the level of a powerhouse in the airborne realm. The violet elf was obviously not in the airborne realm. The bloody gap at that time was still fresh in his memory. It didn't look like a martial arts technique at all. Mu Qing looked at Lin Tian with a smile. "Okay, little guy. You have that expert behind you. You will definitely be able to come into contact with the level after the airborne realm in the future. Moreover, with the talent you have shown, even without that expert, you should be able to break through the airborne realm in the future by your own ability and reach a new world." Lin Tian smiled bitterly. "Senior, you think too highly of me. Breaking through the airborne realm was not that simple." "I'm not thinking highly of you. I'm just telling the truth." Mu Qing shook his head. In this room, Lin Tian, Mu Qing, and Sherdong chatted for a long time before leaving. Sushu followed him out. Walking out of the disciples' pavilion, along the way, Sushu kept staring at Lin Tian with her big eyes. Moreover, she was looking back and forth. That feeling was as if Lin Tian was some kind of rare monster. "Little Sushu, have you seen enough?" Lin Tian was speechless. "Bah! Call me senior sister!" Sushu snapped. Lin Tian rolled his eyes. "I'm much stronger than you. If I call you senior sister, do you have the nerve to say yes?" He said a lot 5 times in a row. Suddenly, Sushu was so angry that she ground her teeth and raised her leg to kick him. "Who told you to show off?" Sushu said angrily. Lin Tian couldn't help but laugh. This girl seemed to be quite cute when she was being fierce. While playing with Sushu, Lin Tianyi walked in a direction. "Where are you going?" Sushu asked. "Martial Arts Pavilion. Didn't I reach the Divine Pulse realm? It's time to pick a low-level Divine Pulse realm martial art." Lin Tian now. "Oh." Sushu nodded, then shook her head. She looked at Lin Tian with a strange face. "Speaking of which, don't you have a master? Didn't he teach you a cultivation method? I heard from Old Man Mu and Old Man Sure that the master behind you seems to be very powerful. The cultivation method he gave you shouldn't be bad." Do you still need a cultivation method or martial art from the martial house? You asked the right question. Lin Tian spread out his hands and said, That person only taught me a cultivation technique and a set of movement techniques. Other than that, there was nothing else. Su Shu understood. So you came to the martial house to secretly learn martial arts? Chapter 105. Remember the literature building in 1 second. It provides you with interesting novels to read. Lin Tian was preparing to head to the martial scripture pavilion to pick a martial technique, so Su Shu didn't follow him. After all, only the person who picked a martial technique could enter the martial scripture pavilion. It was meaningless for Su Shu to go. I'm going back to sleep. Goodbye. Su Shu snorted. With that, Su Shu turned around and left. Lin Tian smiled and shook his head. He then walked towards the martial scripture pavilion. Soon, he arrived at the martial scripture pavilion and handed the jade token to the martial pavilion elder. Not bad! The martial pavilion elder naturally knew a lot of things about Lin Tian. He smiled and said, Go to the 3rd floor. You can pick a Divine Vein Realm cultivation technique and a low-grade Divine Vein Realm martial technique. There is no time limit. Thank you, Elder. Lin Tian now replied and walked towards the 3rd floor. When he arrived at the 3rd floor, Lin Tian noticed that the space on this floor was much more spacious than the 2nd floor. Lin Tian didn't find it strange. After all, this was the place where the Divine Vein Realm cultivation techniques and martial techniques were stored. The highest martial technique in the 9-yang martial house was only the low-grade Divine Vein Realm, which was much less compared to the body refinement realm cultivation techniques. Therefore, it took up less space. Mysterious Heart Technique. Wind-breaking Scripture. White Cotton Technique. Lin Tian casually glanced at the various Divine Vein Realm cultivation techniques and immediately went to the shelf where the martial techniques were stored. He had the 4 extreme scripture. This set of cultivation techniques was enough for him to reach the flight realm. Therefore, he didn't need any cultivation techniques and naturally didn't mind. When he walked to the martial technique shelf, the martial technique manuals were displayed in front of him. Fish Saint Spear. Once the spear is launched, it will be extremely powerful. Weakness, weak defense. Wolf Demon Blade. Full of power. Both offense and defense. Chasing Cloud Archery Technique. Terrifying attack power. Combined with pure True Yuan, it can be used to attack from a distance. It is hard to defend against. Lin Tian flipped through the manuals and put them down repeatedly. He was never in a hurry to choose a martial skill. The illusory cloud palm, the palm shadows fill the entire sky. At most 98 palm shadows can be unleashed. It can seal off the surrounding space. Its offensive power is extremely tyrannical. Lin glanced over, muttering to himself. Zhou Hao seems to have chosen this martial skill. The power of the fantasy cloud palm was extraordinary, but Lin Tian wasn't interested in it. As he continued to read, Lin Tian discovered that there were quite a few movement-type martial skills, such as the numbing light flash, the flowing cloud escape technique, and the green martial technique, all of which looked extraordinary. However, Lin Tianji gave up after a glance. He had the yin-yang puppet, and this set of movement techniques was far superior to ordinary movement techniques. There was no need for him to cultivate other movement techniques. Annihilating Light Slash, a dual sword technique that is even more powerful than a single sword technique. Lion's Roar, a sound assassination technique. It is extremely difficult to cultivate, and its killing power is extraordinary. Double Grappling Technique. It can be used for both strong and soft attacks. It emphasizes both strength and softness. Lin Tianyi looked at him and shook his head repeatedly. Very quickly an hour passed. At this moment, Lin Tian's gaze fell on a fist technique called the Meteorite Shattering Fist. Meteorite Shattering Fist, attacking from the outside and injuring the inside. The enemy may seem unscathed on the surface, but their internal organs may have already been shattered. Lin Tian read it out subconsciously, and his expression changed instantly. The meteorite shattering fist wasn't as difficult to cultivate as the Azure Thunder Sword technique, and it wasn't even as difficult as the shocking Wind Sword technique. However, this fist technique had a very subtle explanation of the use of force. It required the combination of physical strength and true core force to achieve a similar frequency, and then it would be transformed into a fist force to strike out. It seems that this is quite similar to the process of merging true core force and soul force when array manipulators inscribe array patterns. Lin Tian muttered to himself. After a pause, Lin Tian made his decision. This was it. Attacking from the outside and injuring the inside. This was indeed somewhat attractive to him. At this moment, Lin Tian took the meteorite shattering fist and casually chose another technique as a disguise, and then walked down to the 3rd floor. Arriving at the 1st floor, Lin Tian handed over the chosen technique to the Martial Pavilion Elder. This time you've chosen not bad. Not bad at all. After the Martial Pavilion Elder finished the registration, he handed the techniques back to Lin Tian and said, Azure Thunder Sword technique, how's your cultivation? There are only 3 levels, and I've already completely comprehended it. Lin Tian Andao. The Martial Pavilion Elder seemed to have already known. He smiled helplessly and said, What a little monster! All right, you can go now. This disciple will take his leave. Lin Tian bowed. After leaving the Martial Pavilion, Lin Tian returned to his residence to wash up, and then went to rest. In the past 3 months, he had almost never had a good rest. He had been desperately cultivating. Now that many things had come to an end, he decided to have a good rest and start cultivating tomorrow. After all, the body was the capital of the revolution. The next day, when the sun was shining, Lin Tian woke up early and faced the morning sun to breathe. Phew! After a quarter of an hour, Lin Tian finished his breathing and exhaled a mouthful of turbid qi. After informing Lin Qi, Lin Tian headed to the inner mansion. There was an illusory killing formation in the inner mansion. Although it was much smaller than the one in the inner martial cave, it could evolve a demonic beast comparable to the divine pulse realm. At this moment, Lin Tian came for this illusory killing formation to cultivate the shattering meteorite fist. Literature building. Soon, Lin Tian arrived at the inner mansion and walked in under the shocked gaze of the deacons. Yesterday's incident had spread like wildfire. The name, Lin Tian, had become famous in the entire Fengjian city. It could be said that there was no one who did not know him, and the 2 deacons were no exception. Lin Tian did not care about this and walked straight to the cultivation area of the inner mansion. Soon, Tao Bai and the other 2 walked out from another path and met Lin Tian. Brother Lin, you're here, Tao Bai said. The 3 of them looked at Lin Tian, and a trace of surprise flashed across their eyes. Tao Bai and the other 2 knew about yesterday's incident. Lin Tian actually controlled the general's deputy command and was a rank 3 array manipulator. This really shocked the 3 of them. Tianze stared at Lin Tian and said with an unnatural smile, Brother Lin has really surprised us. I didn't expect you to be the one in charge of the deputy command of the general. Moreover, you're also a rank 3 array manipulator. Lin Tian was moved. The 3 of them did not seem to be as casual as yesterday. After thinking about it, Lin Tian also knew the reason. He immediately said seriously, Senior Tian, please don't say that. In the end, Lin Tianji is a new disciple who just entered the inner mansion. Senior Tian, you 3 senior brothers, introduced Lin Tian to the inner mansion yesterday. Lin Tian is already very grateful. If there is disrespect, it should be Lin Tian who said that he disturbed your cultivation yesterday. If people respect me, I will respect them tenfold. This was Lin Tian's principle. Tianze was slightly stunned. He did not expect Lin Tian to be so easy to talk to. After all, whether it was the controller of the general's deputy command or a rank 3 array manipulator, these 2 identities were very shocking. Even the city lord of Fengjian City had to pay respects to Lin Tian when he saw him. Tao Bai said with a loud laugh. Like I said, Brother Lin Tian is not the kind of person who thinks he is infallible. It is really me who is narrow-minded. Tianze smiled. Of course. Tao Bai did not care at all. As he spoke, this guy actually stuck to Lin Tian's side, his eyes shining. Lin Tian suddenly blushed with shame. What are you doing? Don't talk, let me touch the immortal qi. Tao Bai rubbed hard on Lin Tian's body. Lin Tian. Tianze smiled and looked at Lin Tian now. Brother Lin came to the inner mansion at this time, is it for cultivation? Yes, I just chose a low-grade immortal vein martial technique. Lin Tian nodded. Then, you should be going to the illusion killing array. Tianze said. Lin Tian smiled. Indeed. Just in time, the three of us are also going to the illusion killing array. Tianze said. Let's go together. Lin Tian naturally had no objection. Immediately, the four of them walked towards the illusion killing array. The illusion killing array was located in the depths of the inner mansion. Lin Tian followed Tianze and the other two to a corridor. Stepping on the wooden corridor, there were creaking sounds from time to time. This was not because the corridor was broken, but because it was originally designed like this. This corridor was relatively long, and there were many plants on both sides. They were all unusual, and there was a strange fragrance floating out. This is really a good place, Lin Tian secretly said. Yesterday, he only took a quick glance. Today, after taking a closer look, Lin Tian felt that the environment of the inner mansion was really quiet and secluded. Going around a corner, in front of them, there was a young man in purple. Lin Tian's eyes slightly narrowed. It was the number 1 disciple of the inner mansion, Su Muyang. Su Muyang naturally also saw Lin Tian. His eyes flickered slightly, then returned to normal, and his footsteps did not change. Senior brother Su. Tianze stopped in his tracks and shouted. Su Muyang's face was indifferent, with a cold arrogance in his bones. He did not respond and just walked past the three of them. Tao Bai glanced behind and snorted. What are you acting so arrogant for? Aren't you just a third-layer immortal vein? Every time you act like you're the number 1 in the world. Tianze was slightly embarrassed and smiled. Forget it, everyone is different. Let's go. Let's go. Tao Bai put his arm around Lin Tian's shoulder and smiled. Brother Lin is still the straightforward one. Lin Tian smiled, while Kong Heng was still silent. Soon, the four of them arrived in front of the illusion killing array. Looking around, there were many disciples of the inner mansion around the illusion killing array. Lin Tian did not care about this. Tianze said, although the illusion killing array here is small, it can accommodate 27 people at one time. Because there are 30 people in the inner mansion, there is usually no competition. To enter the illusion killing array, you have to prepare your own beast cores as the array source. Of course, this is not a big deal. Lin Tian nodded and suddenly felt embarrassed. Well, I didn't bring any beast cores. In the past 3 months, Lin Tianyi was busy cultivating. Although he took a few beast cores in the dark forest, they were all refined by the sword mark in his right hand, and the refining effect was terrible. Lin Tian discovered that the sword mark on his right hand could indeed allow him to absorb the spiritual qi from the beast cores for cultivation. However, only the beast cores of demonic beasts that were higher ranked than him were of any use. Although he could absorb the spiritual qi from the beast cores of demonic beasts that were lower ranked than him, there was no effect at all. Don't worry, I have it, Tao Bai said. Lin Tian was a little embarrassed. Thank you? Tao Bai waved his hand. It's nothing. Don't mention it. The four of them nodded at each other and stepped into the array after handing the beast cores to the deacons. Chapter 106. 1 second Remember Literature Building, providing you with wonderful novels to read. Having entered the inner Martial Cave's illusionary killing array once, Lin Tian was not surprised by the current situation. Immediately, he took a deep breath and his whole body became somewhat ethereal. Almost in an instant, roars rang out, and demonic beasts appeared. This was a 3rd-level monster called the Flame-Splitting Rat, which was comparable to the 8th level of the Refinement Realm. Obviously, The martial house was very clear about the cultivation of the inner palace disciples, so they made a lot of adjustments to this illusionary killing array. The enemies that appeared were at least at the level of a third-level monster. The flame-splitting rat roared and rushed towards Lin Tian. Who? Lin Tian breathed rhythmically and dodged the flame-splitting rat's attack. At the same time, the essentials of the martial skill mental cultivation method appeared in his mind. Cover the fist with true essence and gather the physical force, so that the two reach the same frequency. Then use the fist force to attack the enemy's body and injure the enemy's internal organs and flesh. Lin Tian muttered to himself. Lin Tian started by adjusting his breathing, and then slowly condensed the true essence to the fist of his right hand. Gradually, a layer of faint silver light appeared on the surface of his fist. Done! After muttering, Lin Tian began to adjust the strength of his fist. Compared to covering the fist with true essence, adjusting the strength of the fist was undoubtedly more difficult. After all, the strength of the fist was too illusory and difficult to grasp. However, fortunately, Lin Tian practiced the array control technique and had fused true essence and soul force. Therefore, when performing this step, it was more or less helpful. The flame-splitting rat roared and crazily chased after Lin Tian. However, Lin Tian's speed was extremely fast. How could a mere third-level monster compare to him? In this way, a quarter of an hour passed quickly. At this moment, Lin Tian's eyes suddenly flashed with a trace of light. His right arm slightly moved back and then punched out. This punch steadily landed on the flame-splitting rat's body. The splitting flame rat let out a roar and stumbled back a few meters. However, it wasn't seriously injured. However, even so, the splitting flame rat still felt the pain. With a furious roar, it immediately charged toward Lin Tian, its ferocious beast nature erupting. As Lin Tian dodged, he summarized his failures. He wasn't surprised that he had failed once. After all, it was an inferior divine vein realm martial technique, and it was impossible for him to comprehend it instantly. True inner force, physical charisma, similar frequency, Lin Tian muttered. Gradually, Lin Tian even closed his eyes, using his soul power to dodge the splitting flame rat's attacks. He used his mind to sense the direction of his true yuan and physical strength, adjusting the density of his true yuan and the strength of his physical strength. Just like that, another 15 minutes passed very quickly. After 15 minutes, Lin Tian suddenly opened his eyes and slowly punched out with his right fist. With a muffled groan, Lin Tian's right fist gently landed on the splitting flame rat's body. This attack didn't even make the splitting flame rat retreat half a step, as if it was just a soft punch. However, after a few breaths, when Lin Tian withdrew his right fist, the splitting flame rat opened its mouth and blood gushed out. It softly fell down, and the ferocious light in its eyes quickly dissipated. Lin Tian walked forward. From the outside, the splitting flame rat didn't seem to have any injuries. After calming himself down, a short dagger appeared in his right hand, and he quickly cut open the splitting flame rat's body. After that, the splitting flame rat's flesh and blood were stuck together like porridge, and cracks appeared on its internal organs. "I've learned the basics!" A trace of light flashed in Lin Tian's eyes. When he stood up, the splitting flame rat's body on the ground shattered with a puff and dissipated like light. Lin Tian glanced at it and didn't care. At this time, a beast's roar sounded again, and a new monster condensed. Lin Tian already knew the rules of the illusion killing array, so he didn't find it strange. He quickly adjusted his posture and began a new round of cultivation. This second monster was a peak level 3 monster, comparable to the 9th layer of the body refinement realm, but compared to Lin Tian's current cultivation, the difference was too great. Lin Tian continued to dodge while comprehending the meteor-shattering fist intent. After a while, Lin Tian punched out. With a bang, the peak level 3 monster retreated, blood gushing out of its mouth, but it didn't die. With a roar, the monster attacked Lin Tian again. True essence and fist energy have reached the same frequency, but after this, if I want to increase the power of the meteor-shattering fist, I have to increase the density of my true essence and physical strength, and increase the frequency of both. Only then can I kill stronger enemies. Lin Tian muttered to himself. Thinking of this, Lin Tian took a deep breath and began to increase the output of his true essence. Of course, the output of his physical strength also became stronger. After this, with the increase of his true essence and physical strength, Lin Tian suddenly felt that it was much harder to adjust them to the same frequency. However, this was a normal thing. Lin Tian concentrated, and the rhythm of his breathing also changed. After a quarter of an hour, Lin Tian punched out a second time. Bang! The peak level 3 monster spat out blood and retreated, but it didn't die, and once again attacked Lin Tian fiercely. In this illusion-killing array, the monster didn't feel any fear, only the desire to kill. Therefore, although Lin Tian was strong, the monster didn't retreat at all. Bang! 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 In the next hour, Lin Tian punched out 3 times in a row. When the third punch landed, the peak level 3 monster finally stopped moving, and like the splitting flame rat, it softly fell, its internal organs completely shattered. Lin Tian withdrew his fist, and his eyes flashed. Just barely. He muttered to himself. Without stopping, Lin Tian began to adjust his breathing to welcome the next monster. After about 20 breaths, a level 4 monster appeared. This monster was called the Strength Ape, and it was famous for its strength. It was very strong. Most importantly, this Strength Ape had thick skin and flesh, and it was difficult for ordinary swords to hurt it. Just nice, I can practice my fist techniques. Lin Tian thought to himself. Without any hesitation, he kicked his right leg and charged forward. Only the Strength Ape with the desire to kill let out a loud roar and charged forward. Lin Tian dodged continuously, and then raised his fist to attack. Compared to the previous 2 monsters, the Strength Ape was undoubtedly harder to deal with. Lin Tian's fist landed on the Strength Ape, but it was completely unharmed. Roar! The Strength Ape roared, and like a violent devil monkey, it leaped towards Lin Tian. Lin Tian adjusted his breathing, and punched out with his meteorite-shattering fist again and again. Bam, bam, bam! Lin Tian fought with the Strength Ape, and 2 hours passed very quickly. In these 2 hours, he punched out a total of 9 times with the meteorite-shattering fist. Each time, the interval between the punches would be shortened slightly. Fighting is indeed the best way to increase the speed of cultivation. Lin Tian thought to himself. It was precisely because he thought of this that Lin Tian came to the illusory killing formation to cultivate. The results were indeed good. However, Lin Tian also knew that this could not be considered a real battle. After all, in the illusory killing formation, although the monsters looked very real, they did not possess any killing power. In other words, he would not die. Since he would not die, he would not be able to feel threatened. It was a far cry from a real battle. Shaking his head, Lin Tian took a deep breath and continued to cultivate. Very quickly, another 4 hours passed. Bang! A muffled grunt sounded. Finally, the Strength Ape fell to the ground, blood gushing out of its mouth. Lin Tian used the same method to cut open the Strength Ape's corpse. The insides of the Strength Ape's body were not much different from that of the flame-splitting rat. Its flesh was sticky and its organs were broken. Good. Lin Tian nodded to himself, slightly satisfied. The Strength Ape was of the same realm as him. In 6 hours he had killed the Strength Ape with the meteorite-shattering fist alone. He could be considered to have cultivated this fist technique to a small success. It's about time. Let's call it a day, Lin Tian muttered to himself. After a pause, he walked out of the illusory killing formation. Tao Bai and the other 2 had already walked out. When they saw Lin Tian, they went up to him. Brother Lin, you are a little too focused. Tianze smiled bitterly. Tao Bai said, To be so strong, it seems like you have put in a lot of effort and not just talent. After entering the illusory killing formation, the 3 of them had only cultivated for slightly more than 2 hours. As for Lin Tian, he had cultivated for 8 hours. This made Tao Bai and Tianze feel a little ashamed. Even Kong Heng was no exception. I just lost track of time, Lin Tian said modestly. After chatting with the three of them for a while, Lin Tian left the inner manor and returned to his residence. After washing up, Lin Tian went to the pavilion at the top and took out some materials from his stone ring. After taking a look, these materials added up to about 5 sets of spirit-gathering runes. It's time to go out and buy some materials to create spirit-gathering runes. I'll need to spend quite a lot of them in the future. After reaching the Divine Meridian Realm, he still had to continue cultivating. In order to increase his cultivation speed, he naturally couldn't lack spirit-gathering runes. After giving it some thought, Lin Tian couldn't help but mutter to himself, "Oh, I should also go to the Treasury Pavilion to take a look." Puxi and Xian Yao treated him quite well and had invited him a few times. Of course, he had to make a trip down. "I'll just bring some things over," Lin Tian muttered to himself. With that, he started to create formation scrolls with the materials he had on hand. Fengjian City was bustling with people. On this day, almost every corner of the city was discussing what had happened the day before. A 16-year-old young man had killed 3 Empire's generals on the streets, and leisurely faced over 1,000 soldiers in Fengjian City alone. After that, he had ordered them to retreat. This matter was undoubtedly sensational and had become the topic of conversation for some storytellers. The deputy commander of the general's order. His status is equivalent to the Empire's great general. A rank 3 array controller. How revered is his status? A heaven-defying monster! Such voices could be heard in every corner of Fengjian City. Lin Tian naturally heard these voices as he walked on the streets. However, he didn't care. Soon, he arrived at the Treasury Pavilion amidst countless shocked gazes. "Brother Lin!" As soon as he entered the Treasury Pavilion, the middle-aged man from the inspection hall came up to him. Puxi had briefly mentioned Lin Tian's identity yesterday. Therefore, even though Lin Tian wasn't wearing his black robes, the middle-aged man recognized Lin Tian at a glance. "Lord Puxi said that if Brother Lin comes to the Treasury Pavilion, please go to the 2nd floor," the middle-aged man said respectfully. The middle-aged man already knew what had happened yesterday. He looked at Lin Tian with respect. "Okay." Lin Tian nodded. Soon, Lin Tian was led to the 2nd floor by the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man knocked on the door of a room on the 2nd floor. "Lord Puxi, Brother Lin is here." A moment later, the door opened from the inside with a creak. Puxi stood at the door with a smile on his face. He looked at Lin Tian now and said, "Brother, please come in." "Sorry to disturb you." Lin Tian nodded with a smile and walked in. Chapter 107. Remember literature building in a second. We provide you with wonderful novels to read. Lin Tianji felt a headache coming on. He didn't even need to think to know who the owner of the voice was. After a pause, he felt a little embarrassed. This damned seductress had changed the way she addressed him. She had upgraded from little brother to dear. Not only him, but even Puxi staggered and almost fell down. At this moment, Xian Yao had already leaned over and stared at Lin Tian with sparkling eyes. "What are you doing?" Lin Tianyi was embarrassed. This woman was really difficult to deal with. Xian Yao covered her mouth and snickered. "I was thinking about some things in the future and called you by mistake." Xian Yao blinked and stared at Lin Tian. She whispered, "By the way, what did Big Sister call you?" Lin Tian. This woman was definitely trying to tease him. At this moment, Puxi couldn't help but cough dryly. Xian Yao finally moved away from Lin Tian. "Little brother, take a seat." Puxi smiled. Lin Tian didn't stand on ceremony and sat down casually. Xian Yao stared at him and sat down beside him. "My good little brother, did you miss Big Sister and specially came to the treasure pavilion to see me?" Xian Yao said. The woman supported her chin with both hands and blinked occasionally. She was very seductive. Lin Tian blushed with shame and refused to speak. "Miss, if you continue like this, you'll scare the little brother away." Pushi couldn't help but laugh when he saw Lin Tian's embarrassed look. After a pause, Pushi spoke again. Speaking of which, I didn't expect you to be a disciple of the Nine-Yang martial house. You should have a teacher, right? At this point, Pushi's eyes flashed with a glint. Xian Yao stared at Lin Tian and quieted down. Lin Tian already knew that Pushi would ask such a question and was prepared. He said helplessly, My teacher only taught me some cultivation techniques and formation controlling techniques. He left after 4 days. I don't have any cultivation resources, so I could only join the martial house. When I first learned formation controlling techniques, I borrowed 1,000 spirit coins from someone to buy materials. Pushi and Xian Yao were both shocked. He left after passing down the cultivation method? Lin Tian nodded. Yes. Teacher said to wait until I reached the Sea of Consciousness realm before coming to find me. Pushi sucked in a breath of cold air and was even more surprised. Lin Tian knew that at this moment, Pushi and Mu Qing were thinking the same thing. Your teacher is truly amazing, Pushi sighed. However, Pushi didn't ask who Lin Tian's teacher was. Right. At this time, Xian Yao tugged at Lin Tian, narrowed her eyes, and moved her charming face closer. She said with a mischievous smile, Little brother, not long ago, the destruction of the Shao family should have something to do with you, right? The entire Fengjian city knew about the grudge between Lin Tian and the Shao family. Previously, Xian Yao and Pushi had guessed that the destruction of the Shao family was related to the person in the black robe. When they found out that the person in the black robe was Lin Tian, they were even more certain of their guess. It's me. Lin Tian now. This was not something that was hard to say. Literature building. I knew it would be like this. Xian Yao nodded and said, Speaking of which, you array manipulators have many tricks up your sleeves. How did you destroy the Shao family in such a short period of time without anyone noticing? Sister is quite strange. As she spoke, Xian Yao stared at Lin Tian. Pushi smiled and said, Speaking of which, this old man is also quite puzzled. Although this old man is also an array-controlling master, I really can't do what little brother did. How did little brother manage to destroy the Shao clan silently? It's quite simple. Lin Tian thought for a moment. This was not a big secret. It was just a small matter, so he didn't hide it. I can engrave a kind of array pattern called the Gale pattern. The Gale pattern can temporarily hide the body. Using the Gale pattern, I sneaked into the Shao family at night and took away all the property deeds of the Shao family. Of course, at the same time, I also took away the property deeds of the Lin family. Then, I changed the owner of the last part of the deed. In this way, I could easily take over all the properties of the Shao family and Lin Tian. However, at that time, I was somewhat wary of the Mo family, so I always wrapped myself in a black robe and didn't reveal my true body. At this point, Lin Tian stopped. Pushi was shocked. Gale pattern? Little brother, you can actually control this kind of array pattern that can hide the body? Pushi wasn't surprised that Lin Tian destroyed the Shao family. He was surprised that Lin Tian mentioned the Gale pattern. Not only Pushi, but even Xian Yao, who was beside him, was a little surprised. Yes. Lin Tian nodded. There were countless array patterns in Lin Tian's mind. Many of them were not in Beiyan. This Gale pattern was one of them. Therefore, it was normal that Pushi didn't know about it. Xian Yao and Pushi looked at each other, then at Lin Tian. Little brother, can you sell us a few of these Gale rune scrolls? The price will definitely satisfy little brother, Pushi said seriously. Array patterns were the secret of every array manipulator. Pushi naturally couldn't ask for the array pattern directly. Therefore, he could only ask for a few Gale pattern scrolls. Lin Tian paused and said, Of course, that's not a problem. You don't have to worry about the price. To be honest, I don't really care about things like spirit coins now. It's just that. After a pause, Lin Tian smiled bitterly. It's just that to make this Gale pattern, I need the moon dropper as a catalyst. This thing needs a lot of array manipulator guild points to exchange. I can only inscribe this gale pattern when I have enough array manipulator guild points. Moon Dropper? You actually need this thing? Pushi was shocked. Xianyao was stunned. Moon Dropper? Can't you buy it? Pushi shook his head. Miss, it's said that the moon dropper is a liquid condensed in the place where the moonlight is the thickest. Only the array manipulator guild has this thing. As an array manipulator, Pushi knew that the moon dropper was very difficult to find. Xianyao looked at Pushi, paused, and asked curiously, Old Pushi, aren't you the honorary elder of Fengjian City's array manipulator guild? Can you get the moon dropper? Pushi was a little embarrassed. I'm just an honorary elder. Back then, I did it to help that old man gushing a little. I don't have any real power. Even if I have the power, I can't just squander the materials given by the Array Manipulator Guild. Especially precious materials like the moon dropper. Even the guild president can't use it. So it's like that. Xianyao was a little disappointed. Lin Tian was a little confused. Do you really need the Gale Pattern Scrolls? Pushi nodded. We really need it. Lin Tian found that Pushi and Xianyao were actually very serious at this time. So it's like that. Lin Tian thought for a moment and said, Okay, when I can make the Gale Pattern Scrolls again, I'll send them to you immediately. Pushi was a little happy. Then I'll thank little brother in advance. Hee, good little brother. Elder sister didn't dote on you in vain. Xianyao said happily. Lin Tian blushed with shame. This woman really treated him as her elder sister. Oh, right. After a pause, Lin Tian moved his right hand and took out 10 scrolls from his interspatial ring. He said, These are 5 Divine Pulse Realm Martial Fusion Scrolls and 5 Spirit Gathering Scrolls. You can auction them. Before Lin Tian came to the E-Treasure Pavilion, he used the last of his materials to make 5 Martial Fusion Scrolls and merge the Blue Thunder Sword Radiance into them. Then, he made 5 Spirit Gathering Scrolls. He was going to auction these 10 scrolls at the E-Treasure Pavilion. It should be able to earn some spirit coins for the E-Treasure Pavilion. After all, Xianyao sold the stone ring to him at a cheap price and lost more than 1,000,000 spirit coins. In addition, Pushi had helped him a little, so he naturally wanted to return the favor. Oh? Pushi's eyes lit up. He walked to Lin Tian's side and picked up a martial fusion scroll to feel it. He was instantly shocked. What a powerful sword intent. This? I'm afraid it's enough to kill an ordinary early-stage divine pulse expert. Staring at Lin Tian, Pushi sighed and said, As expected of little brother. You're only 16 years old, but you're able to merge such a powerful divine pulse realm martial technique into a small martial fusion scroll. You're truly an out-and-out array controlling genius. Lin Tianwei smiled. You're too kind. Elder Pushi is overpraising me. These 5 martial fusion scrolls are probably enough for some rich merchants to fight over. As for the spirit gathering scrolls, some powerful martial artists also need them. Let's do some calculations. With these 10 scrolls combined, and with your current rank 3 array controlling master identity, you'll be able to sell them for around 300,000 spirit coins. Pushi said. Although Lin Tian knew that these 10 scrolls were quite valuable, he didn't expect them to be so valuable. He couldn't help but sigh with emotion. Array controlling masters were really experts at making money. Pushi looked at Lin Tian and smiled. Little brother, I reckon you'll have to wait for some time because there will be an auction tomorrow afternoon at the latest. Only then can we start the auction. It's fine. I'm not in a hurry. Lin Tian shook his head and paused for a moment. He took out a list and said, This is the list of materials needed to engrave the spirit gathering scrolls. I want to buy some from the Treasure Exchange Pavilion. Although Lin Tian could receive some materials from the Array Controlling Guild every month, the amount he could receive was limited. Now, it couldn't satisfy his cultivation needs. Most importantly, since he was already at the Treasure Exchange Pavilion, Lin Tian thought that he might as well just buy it here. After all, these materials wouldn't cost much. Pushi took a glance and said with a smile, Little brother, please wait for a moment. This old man will order someone to send the materials over. As for the materials, you don't have to pay for them. They're just a few spirit coins. Alright, thank you, Elder Pushi. Lin Tiandao wasn't an overly pretentious person. Moreover, these materials weren't worth much. Of course, this amount of money was for him and the treasure exchange pavilion. If it was for ordinary martial artists or ordinary people, it would undoubtedly be a huge sum of money. When Lin Tian returned to the martial house from the treasure exchange pavilion, the sky had gradually darkened. When he arrived at the top of the pavilion, Lin Tian took out the materials from the stone ring and began to engrave the spirit-gathering scrolls. The Divine Pulse Realm was just a small achievement. Lin Tian's goal was far from the Divine Pulse Realm. Moreover, when he heard Mu Qing mention that there were higher realms after the Airborne Realm, Lin Tian's heart surged with excitement. Since the heavens allowed him to live another life, then he would live a carefree and unrestrained life. He would live a world-shaking life. Chapter 108. In 6 hours, Lin Tian had inscribed a total of 12 spirit-gathering runes. At this moment, the sky was filled with stars, and specks of silver light sprinkled down on the dark land. No pop-up, Lin Tian took out an Enidia elixir from his stone ring and swallowed it. Instantly, he felt that his essence, spirit, and soul had recovered by quite a bit. The feeling of hunger and thirst had also completely disappeared. This Enidia elixir is really convenient, Lin Tian muttered to himself. Taking in a deep breath, Lin Tian activated the 2 sets of spirit-gathering runes and started to cultivate. The cultivation of the Divine Pulse realm was to construct the Divine Pulse. Lin Tian had already constructed the first Divine Pulse, which was from his head to his left arm. At this moment, the 2 spirit-gathering runes were activated, and rich spiritual qi of heaven and earth gathered as he started to construct the second Divine Pulse. For the second Divine Pulse, Lin Tian chose the part from his head to his right arm. Bits of spiritual qi of heaven and earth entered his body as Lin Tian circulated the 4 extremes meridians. Relying on his instincts, he channeled his quintessential essence and spiritual qi into the meridians from his head to his right arm, using these meridians to connect the various acupoints in this area. Just like the first time, intense pain came as expected. Even so, Lin Tian's expression was calm. He didn't even frown. The cultivation of the Divine Pulse realm was many times more difficult than the body refinement realm. One had to constantly be highly focused. If the meridians were connected wrongly, it would be troublesome. Buzz! Gradually, a faint blood glow appeared on the surface of Lin Tian's body. In the Divine Pulse realm, every time one constructed a Divine Pulse, it would take a long time. This was a continuous process. Of course, if there was the support of a vast amount of spiritual qi of heaven and earth, it would be different. For example, with the help of the Divine Accumulation Elixir, Lin Tian was able to construct the first Divine Pulse very quickly. Now, without the support of a vast amount of spiritual qi, Lin Tian could slowly connect the meridians and acupoints. When the meridians and acupoints in this area were completely connected, the second Divine Pulse would be completed, and he would be able to step into the second level of the Divine Pulse realm. On this day, Lin Tian cultivated until dawn. In the morning, Lin Tian stood up and felt that his essence, spirit, and soul had improved significantly. The second holy vein is about 1/15 complete, Lin Tian muttered to himself. Thinking about it, if he continued to cultivate like this, he would be able to reach the second layer of the Divine Vein realm in about half a month. This cultivation speed was a little shocking, but Lin Tian was very clear that this was all due to the Spirit Gathering Rune. Without the Spirit Gathering Rune, under normal circumstances, he would need to spend at least 2 months before he could reach the second level of the Divine Vein realm. After calming himself down, Lin Tian walked down from the pavilion and faced the rising sun to begin his breathing exercises. This was something he had to do every day. About a quarter of an hour later, Lin Tian finished his breathing. After washing up, he walked toward the illusionary killing array in the inner mansion. Cultivating in the martial house was very boring. Lin Tian constructed his divine veins at night, and cultivated his martial skills during the day. Soon 10 days had passed. During these 10 days, Lin Tianyi had continuously inscribed dozens of spirit-gathering runes, and he was about to complete 3/5 of the second holy vein. At the same time, he was about to reach the major success stage of the Shattering Meteorite Fist. On this day, Lin Tian finished his cultivation and walked out of the illusionary killing array. Coincidentally, Tao Bai and the other two also came out. "I heard that Brother Lin has been cultivating here every day. You are really a role model for our generation." Tao Bai smiled. Lin Tian smiled. "I have to work hard to catch up with the three of you." After interacting with them a few times, Lin Tian realized that Tao Bai and the other two were not bad and were worth befriending. "Don't! You are simply insulting us." Tao Bai rolled his eyes and said, "I am not sure about Kong Hang, but I dare to say that your current combat strength is definitely stronger than Tianze and me. In fact, it is more than one level stronger." "You are exaggerating." Lin Tian smiled. "I hope so. Unfortunately, when facing a monster like you, these words are not exaggerated at all." Tao Bai shrugged his shoulders. Apart from Kong Hang, who was naturally a man of few words, the other three were still talking and laughing as they walked out together. Stepping on the wooden corridor, the four of them soon walked far away and were about to reach the entrance of the inner mansion. At this time, Lin Tian suddenly trembled as he felt an icy aura fall on his body. Stopping, Lin Tian followed this aura and tilted his head to look. Not far away, two young men were standing side by side. One was dressed in purple and the other was dressed in black. Lin Tian knew that the purple-clad young man was Sumuyang, but Lin Tian did not know the latter. He only knew that the icy aura was coming from this black-clad young man. Most importantly, Lin Tian noticed that the black-clad young man was staring at him with eyes as cold as a knife, filled with killing intent. "MOG! When did this guy come back?" Tao Bai exclaimed in a low voice. Beside him, Tianze was moved. Even Kong Heng frowned slightly. Lin Tian's heart skipped a beat. This black-clad young man was MOG? No wonder he felt that he looked familiar. No wonder he emitted such a cold, killing intent when staring at him. It turned out that he was Mo Sen's elder brother. Snorting coldly in his heart, Lin Tian's expression was very calm. His eyes did not move at all as he looked at MOG from more than 10 feet away. Suddenly, the space in this place seemed to freeze. Two powerful auras appeared at the same time and silently collided in this space, causing a hurricane to roll up. "What are you doing?" a voice rang out. At the entrance of the inner mansion, a deacon who was in charge of maintaining order noticed the abnormality here. The two auras disappeared at the same time, and the hurricane dissipated. "Nothing," Tao Bai said. The deacon glanced at them suspiciously, and then didn't care anymore. "Let's go, Brother Lin," Tianze said. Lin Tian nodded. Without looking at MOG, who was more than 10 feet away, he left with the other three people. Soon, the four of them were more than 10 feet away. Tao Bai secretly wiped his cold sweat and said, "This MOG is getting more and more terrifying. He's just like a ferocious wild beast." Tianze nodded and said in a deep voice, "He is indeed terrifying." Lin Tian deeply agreed with Tao Bai and Tianze's words. When he looked at MOG just now, he found that MOG's body was straight as a cold spear. MOG's body was surrounded by an extremely powerful killing intent, which gave people a suffocating feeling. He had never felt this kind of feeling even from Mu Qing and the others. When MOG was in the martial house, he was already in the 3rd level of the divine range. Later, he joined the expeditionary army. This army is said to be a sharp knife of the Empire, born to kill. MOG followed the expeditionary army and fought in the border areas. After a long period of killing, his strength naturally became more terrifying. Kong Heng rarely spoke. He said in a deep voice, "He seems to have reached the 4th level of the divine range." "What?" Tao Bai and Tianze were both shocked. The 4th level of the divine range was not simple. Lin Tian nodded and said, "Senior brother Kong should be right. I also have the same feeling." Just now, when he looked at MOG for a short while, he found that MOG's aura was far stronger than MO High's and scarier than Zhou He's. Judging from this, MOG should have reached the 4th level of the Divine Range realm. This is a little troublesome, Tianze muttered. Tao Bai looked at Lin Tian and said seriously, Lin Tian, in short, you have to be careful. Although you have the Deputy General's order and can make all the generals of the Empire submit to you, this MOG is a little different. That guy is a madman. He may not dare to do anything on the surface, but who knows what he will do secretly. Lin Tian nodded. Yes, I know. Just by looking at MOG, Lin Tian knew that this MOG was very dangerous. If you need anything, just say the word. We will not refuse to help if we can, Tianze said. Yes, thank you, Lin Tian andao. Although he didn't think that he would need their help, he was very grateful for their kindness. After that, Lin Tian chatted with them for a while and then left the inner mansion. In the inner mansion, dozens of feet away, MOG and Su Muyang stood together. Their eyes were cold and cruel as they stared at Lin Tian's back from the beginning until Lin Tian walked out of the inner mansion. I'm surprised that you could hold back and not make a move, Su Muyang said. MOG's face was cold, but his eyes were like those of a ferocious beast, emitting a bloodthirsty light. He has the Deputy General's order now. If I make a move directly, it will bring disaster to the family. While speaking, MOG's body intertwined with terrifying killing intent. I will kill him, but I need some time to prepare. Once I make a move, I will take his head. Su Muyang nodded. After joining the expeditionary army, not only have you become more terrifying, but you have also become much calmer. That place is the hell of blood and killing. If I just charge blindly, I will only die, MOG said coldly. That's true, Su Muyang said. I wish you success. MOG looked at Su Muyang. Perhaps you should join me and kill him together. With a cold look in his eyes, MOG continued. Soon, the Imperial Courtyard will be here to recruit new disciples. Although your cultivation is ranked first in the Inner Palace, and he won't be able to surpass you in a short period of time, with his 9-star talent and his identity as a 3rd-rank array manipulator, he will definitely be able to replace you. You are 18 years old this year, and this is your last chance to enter the Imperial Courtyard. If you lose this chance, you will be stuck outside the Imperial Courtyard forever. You can only choose to join the Imperial Army or something else. Lin Tian's news had spread like wildfire in Fengjian City, so MOG naturally knew about it. Su Muyang's face darkened, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. MOG was right. With Lin Tian's monstrous talent and 3rd-rank array manipulator status, it was indeed very likely that he would be selected to enter the Imperial Courtyard this time. However, the Northern Flame Imperial Courtyard's recruitment requirements were very strict. One of them was that the age could not exceed 18 years old. He was 18 years old this year. If he lost this chance, he would lose the qualification to enter the Imperial Courtyard forever. Think about it, MOG said. After saying that, MOG turned around and walked out of the inner mansion. Su Muyang stood in place, his hands subconsciously clenched, cracking his knuckles. Lin Tian! A cold voice drifted out, lingering in the air. After leaving the inner mansion, Lin Tian went straight back to his residence, and went to the top floor as usual. MOG, huh? In the inner mansion, Lin Tian only had to look at MOG for a moment before he knew that this MOG would definitely make a move on him. Just like what Tao Bai said, MOG might not dare to do anything to him on the surface, but it was hard to say what he would do in the dark. It seems like I should prepare. The MO family must be destroyed, Lin Tian muttered to himself. After quickly packing up his things, Lin Tian and Lin Shi greeted each other and left for the Array Manipulator Association. Good, that thing, Old Pooh and Xian Yao also need it. Lin Tian planned to complete some missions issued by the Array Manipulator Association to earn points to exchange for the Moon Drop Seed and use it to inscribe the Gale Rune. With his current cultivation, the Gale Rune would be enough for him to silently sneak into the MO family. After this, he planned to spend some time to prepare a big gift for the MO family. Chapter 109. 1 second. Remember, literature building, providing you with interesting novels to read. The Array Manipulator Guild had a special status in Fengjian City and was highly revered. Every day, most of the people who passed by the guild would stop and look at the signboard at the top of the guild with reverence in their eyes before leaving. Summer gradually passed, and today, the weather was much warmer. Lin Tian wore a white robe, and when he arrived at the Array Manipulator Guild, he immediately attracted many respectful gazes. "It's him! The genius array manipulator from before! The general's deputy commander!" Many people stared at Lin Tian, whispering, their eyes full of shock. "Mr. Lin." Mi Fei greeted him, her face full of respect, and there was even a strange light in her eyes. Lin Tian's news had spread throughout Fengjian City, and Mi Fei naturally knew about it. Now, Lin Tian was only 16 years old, but he already had such achievements. As a girl, of course, Mi Fei worshipped Lin Tian, and had some feelings for him. Lin Tian smiled and said, "I'm here to pick up some guild missions." Mi Fei nodded. "Do you want to see Elder Ge?" Lin Tian thought and smiled. "No need, I'm a bit busy right now, and at this time, Elder Ge should be studying runes, so I won't disturb you. We'll talk about it when I turn in the missions." As he spoke, Lin Tian looked at the guild's mission board, and chose 4 missions in a row. The general goal was to find the soul-tooth grass, obtain the blood essence of the level 4 red-tailed tiger, obtain the blood essence of the level 4 spirit armor bull, and obtain the claws and fur of the level 4 stone fairy fox. These missions together would give about 200 guild points. After a while, Mi Fei finished recording. "Then I'll be going." Lin Tian andao. Mi Fei nodded, bowed, and said, "Please be careful with your missions." "Literature building." Lin Tian smiled, and walked out. In the guild, after seeing the missions Lin Tian chose, some people couldn't help but suck in a cold breath. "Most of them are level 4 beasts. Scary. He's so strong at such a young age, what will happen when he grows up?" Many people's eyes were full of shock. When they arrived at the dark forest, there was still a dense crowd at the edge of the forest. It was currently afternoon. Although the sun was still hanging in the sky, it was not as hot as before. Instead, it was warm and comfortable when it shone on people's bodies. "The soul-tooth grass is about 500 feet away from the edge." Lin Tian muttered to himself, and shot straight into the dark forest. This was his 3rd time in the Forest of Darkness. Therefore, he was more or less familiar with the layout of the Forest of Darkness. Relying on his previous intuition, Lin Tian soon arrived at a place where the trees were sparse. This place was mainly filled with shrubs, and at the roots of the shrubs were some inch-tall dark red stalks of grass. Lin Tianwei smiled. He had found the soul-tooth grass. Walking over, Lin Tian took out a small pouch and picked dozens of soul-tooth grasses in a row. Only then did he stop and put the pouch into the stone ring. This soul-tooth grass could be used for simple hemostasis, and it could also be used as a material for array manipulators to create certain array patternings. Of course, its effects were very ordinary. After putting away the soul-tooth grass, Lin Tian stood up and looked into the depths of the dark forest. "Red-tailed tiger, spiritual armored bull, stone fairy raccoon," Lin Tian muttered to himself. As he muttered to himself, he had already shot out. In the blink of an eye, he was already several feet away. Literature building, on one hand, he came to the dark forest to earn points to exchange for the gale pattern on the moon drop seed. On the other hand, Lin Tian had almost mastered the meteorite fist. He wanted to come to the dark forest to gain experience, and test the power of the meteorite fist. He wanted to truly apply this fist technique in actual combat. At the same time, actual combat was the best way to increase one's combat power. Therefore, when he was in the Array Manipulators Guild, he mostly chose missions that required him to kill demonic beasts to obtain blood essence. Stepping on old trees, Lin Tian leaped through the forest like an agile monkey. Not long after, a blood-colored tiger demon appeared before him. The tiger demon had a mouth full of sharp teeth, but its tail was bald. Upon closer inspection, one could see that there were some tiny barbs growing out of its bald red tail. The tail of a fourth-grade demonic beast, red-tailed tiger, is the most dangerous part, Lin Tian thought to himself. This was what he learned from the introduction of the demonic beasts in the dark forest that Mi-Fei gave him. After thinking for a moment, he had already rushed out. In a flash, he arrived in front of the red-tailed tiger and punched it. Seeing that someone was attacking it, the red-tailed tiger roared and rushed towards Lin Tian. With a bang, Lin Tian's fist landed on the red-tailed tiger, and the latter was immediately sent flying. However, in the process of flying, the red-tailed tiger's tail whipped out. Dense barbs suddenly appeared on its bald tail. They were frighteningly sharp, and shone with a cold light under the sun. Lin Tian's right hand moved, and the sword of Guiyuan came out. He directly chopped down. With a puff, the red-tailed tiger's tail was chopped off, and blood spurted out. The red-tailed tiger was in pain. It stared at Lin Tian with resentment, and the murderous light in its eyes suddenly became 10 times stronger. Lin Tian smiled, put away his sword, and jumped over again. Meteorite-shattering fist! With a low shout, Lin Tian slowly waved his fist and smashed it on the red-tailed tiger's head. The red-tailed tiger screamed and suddenly fell down, blood gushing out of its mouth. Literature building. When Lin Tian walked over, the red-tailed tiger was already dead. On the surface, the red-tailed tiger didn't have any scars, but when Lin Tian cut its head with a dagger, most of the inside was destroyed by the internal strength of the meteorite-shattering fist. The power is really good, Lin Tian thought to himself. After cutting open the red-tailed tiger's head and taking a small bottle of blood essence and its beast core, Lin Tian turned and left. Next, he was going to hunt the spirit armor cattle. The spirit armor cattle was also a level 4 demonic beast. It was about 2,000 feet away from the dark forest. Moreover, this kind of demonic beast, like the blood wolf, liked to live in groups and was very dangerous. Lin Tian was extremely fast. Soon, he could already see the figure of the spirit armor cattle. Found it! Lin Tian smiled to himself. At this moment, the earth trembled violently. Not far away, 2 waves of violent demonic chi spread out, causing many demonic beasts in the area to tremble in fear. The herd of spirit armor bulls in front of them fled into the distance with a whoosh. Lin Tianwei was slightly annoyed, but he was also a little surprised. This demonic aura is so strong! While muttering to himself, Lin Tian jumped onto the top of an old tree and looked into the distance. Dozens of feet away, 2 powerful demonic beasts were fighting. Every simple movement would break many old trees. It was very terrifying. Red-eyed centipede and 9-flame demonic leopard. Lin Tian sucked in a cold breath. The red-eyed centipede and 9-flame demonic leopard were both level 5 peak demonic beasts, comparable to experts in the 5th layer of the divine range. Rumble! In front of them, the red-eyed centipede moved its 100 legs at the same time. The centipede's legs, which were as dense as iron armor, pierced into the body of the demonic leopard. Lin Tianyi felt his scalp tingle. Of course, the 9-flame demonic leopard wasn't weak either. It opened its mouth and spat out a flame, burning the red-eyed centipede and causing it to scream. Lin Tian gasped. These 2 demonic beasts were indeed terrifying. He didn't seem to be a match for them now. The 2 of them were fighting dozens of feet away. Blood splattered and old trees collapsed. Soon half an hour passed. At this moment, the red-eyed centipede suddenly let out a strange cry. It opened its mouth and spat out a ball of green liquid, splashing it on the head of the 9-flame demonic leopard. Roar! The 9-flame demonic leopard screamed. White smoke rose from its head, and its eyes turned white. Lin Tian was shocked. This liquid was poisonous. There was no doubt about the outcome. The 9-flame demonic leopard that had lost its eyes was no longer a match for the red-eyed centipede. It was quickly killed by the 9-flame demonic leopard. Its beast core was snatched and swallowed by the red-eyed centipede. After that, the red-eyed centipede crouched and crawled away slowly. It was obvious that the red-eyed centipede was also severely injured. In the distance, Lin Tian clicked his tongue and said, It's really different when it has more legs. It's really powerful. Lin Tian paused for a moment, and then a wisp of bright light flashed through his eyes while a cold smile appeared on the corners of his mouth. The beast core of a peak level 5 demonic beast. He couldn't let it go. With a whoosh, he rushed out and caught up with the red-eyed centipede in the blink of an eye. He landed in front of the red-eyed centipede. Seeing someone blocking its way, the red-eyed centipede let out a fierce roar. Its 8 blood-red demonic eyes stared straight at Lin Tian, emitting waves of cold and murderous aura. If you were in your prime, I might be afraid. But now, it's different. Lin Tianling smiled. He spread out the yin-yang puppet and rushed over like lightning, smashing the meteorite fist. Bang! 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 Lin Tian kept throwing the meteorite fist. Finally, after the 6th punch, the red-eyed centipede stopped moving completely. Stopping his movements, Lin Tian wiped the cold sweat off his forehead. It's worthy of being called a peak level 5 demonic beast. Even with such injuries, it still took me 15 minutes. After saying that, Lin Tian took out a dagger and cut open the red-eyed centipede's demonic body. He took out 2 beast cores. One was the red-eyed centipede's, and the other was the 9 flame demonic leopards. The red-eyed centipede swallowed them and didn't have time to digest them. Staring at the 2 beast cores, Lin Tian clearly felt the vast spiritual power contained in them. He couldn't help but feel excited. This was really a surprise. After refining these 2 beast cores, I will definitely enter the 2nd level of the Holy Range. Without any hesitation, Lin Tian found a hidden place and held the 2 level 5 beast cores in his right hand. With a thought, the sword tattoo in his right hand lit up. After that, the vast spiritual power in the 2 beast cores gushed into Lin Tian's body like a flood. Taking a deep breath, Lin Tian operated the 4 extremes meridians and used his genuine core strength to guide the vast spiritual power into each of his meridians. Then, he connected these meridians to each of his meridians. The process was a little painful, but it wasn't the first time Lin Tian had experienced such pain. Naturally, he didn't care too much about it. He didn't even groan. Buzz! A faint blood glow intertwined outside of Lin Tian's body. His aura was rising steadily. In this way, an hour passed quickly. In this hour, Lin Tian connected all the meridians and acupoints from his head to his right hand. The 2nd holy range was completed. Boom! Chapter 110. Remember the literature building in 1 second, providing you with wonderful novels to read. The true essence in his body surged like the yellow river, boiling for dozens of breaths. After dozens of breaths, the majestic energy gradually subsided. The 2 level 5 beast cores in Lin Tian's hand dimmed completely, turning into 2 useless rocks. At this moment, Lin Tian finally opened his eyes. 2nd level of the divine range, Lin Tian muttered, and a glint flashed across his eyes. Clenching his fists, Lin Tian felt that he had become stronger. The divine range in his arms was completely condensed, and his arms were as hard as diamond. Exhaling a mouthful of turbid air, Lin Tian casually threw away the discarded beast cores in his hand. Originally, he was going to hunt the spiritual armor cows, but he didn't expect to see 2 level 5 peak demonic beasts fighting to the death. Then, he got a great bargain and took their beast cores. This made Lin Tian feel that his luck was not bad. I wonder if there are any more spiritual armor cows in that area. After so long, some of them should have returned. Lin Tian andao. As he muttered to himself, he had already shot out. The habitat of the spiritual armor cows was not too far from here. Soon, Lin Tian arrived. After a few big circles, he really found 3 spiritual armor cows. Lin Tian's lips curled up slightly, and he took a step forward. A fierce battle began. Lin Tian fought 3 level 4 demonic beasts at the same time with his own strength. He didn't use any movement techniques or sword arts, and only used the meteorite fist to kill them. This process lasted for 15 minutes. After 15 minutes, the 3 spiritual armor cows all fell to the ground. There were no wounds on their bodies, but their internal organs were completely shattered. My battle strength has increased a lot, and I can use the meteorite fist more smoothly. Lin Tian clenched his fists. After his cultivation reached the second sky of the divine range, his strength had increased a lot in all aspects. Taking out his dagger, Lin Tian took out the beast cores of the 3 spiritual armor cows, filled them with essence blood, and then turned to leave. About an hour later, he found a stone fairy raccoon in a certain area and immediately rushed over. The stone immortal raccoon's body was quite large, but its movements were extremely nimble, just like an intelligent monkey. Every time it raised its 3 tails, it would bring about a sharp blade of light, which was very terrifying. However, this was nothing to Lin Tian. Bang! After tens of breaths of time, Lin Tian's fist smashed onto the back of the stone fairy raccoon, causing it to let out a miserable cry and instantly fall to the ground, unable to get up. Lin Tian looked at the stone fairy raccoon on the ground, then looked at his fist and smiled. He was quite satisfied with the power of this shattering meteorite fist. It attacked from the outside and injured the inside. This kind of invisible and colorless internal attack was a big highlight. After taking the stone fairy raccoon's claw, fur, and beast core, Lin Tian turned and left. Next, Lin Tian walked out of the dark forest. During this process, he fought with the demonic beasts along the way as he walked, using this as a way to temper himself. Bang! 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 The sound of fists hitting flesh could be heard from time to time, accompanied by the miserable cries of the demonic beasts. Not long after, Lin Tian walked out of the dark forest and headed towards Fengjian City. Lin Tian had completed the 4 missions he received, and he had also trained himself a little. It was time for him to go back and submit the missions. After completing this mission, he still had to accept new missions. After all, the amount of guild points needed to exchange for the moon dropper seed was too high. He had to accumulate at least 1,000 guild points. 2 hours later, Lin Tian arrived at Fengjian City from the dark forest. Under the respectful gazes of the soldiers guarding the city gate, he slowly walked into the city. After his cultivation reached the divine pulse realm, his speed was much faster. In the past, it would take him a few hours to reach Fengjian City from the dark forest. Now, it didn't take him so long. Once he entered the city, there were noises coming from all directions. Almost all of them were the cries of the merchants. The sky is about to turn dark. I'll continue the mission tomorrow, Lin Tian muttered to himself. With steady steps, Lin Tian walked towards the Array Controller Guild. Right at this time, Lin Tian suddenly paused. He felt a powerful aura land on him, mixed with clear hostility. Without stopping, Lin Tian continued walking towards the Array Controller Guild. At the same time, he followed the aura and saw a pair of cold eyes staring at him from a tall building nearby. Humph! Lin Tian snorted coldly in his heart. He could roughly guess what was going on. Not paying much attention, Lin Tian continued walking towards the Array Controller Guild. Arriving at the Array Controller Guild, Lin Tian handed over the Soul Tooth Grass, Red-tailed Tiger Blood Essence, Spirit Armor Ox Blood Essence, and Stone Fairy Raccoon Fur to Mifei. Mister, your speed is really fast. Mifei was a little surprised. Of the 4 missions, apart from the Soul Tooth Grass, which was relatively easy, the other 3 were very difficult. After all, they were all targeting Class 4 demonic beasts. However, Lin Tian had completed such a difficult mission in a single day. Not bad, Lin Tian said with a smile. Mifei smiled sweetly. She quickly sorted out the 4 missions and said, It's a total of 200 points. Do you want to exchange them directly or save them first? I'll save them first. Lin Tian smiled. He took a pen and paper from the side and wrote down a long list of materials. He handed it to Mifei and said, These things, can I trouble you to help me pick them out? Of course, no problem, Mifei hurriedly said. She took the list of materials from Lin Tian's hand and quickly ran to the side. Not long after, Mifei came back with a big bag of materials. Everything you want is here. And thanks a lot. Lin Tian said with a smile. After saying that, Lin Tian's right hand moved lightly. Suddenly, the materials were put away. Mi Fei's face was shocked. She stared at Lin Tian with some surprise. How could a bag of things suddenly disappear? There's a small space in here, Lin Tian said with a smile. He raised his right hand and showed Mi Fei the stone ring on his middle finger. How magical! Mi Fei blinked her eyes. Mi Fei was only a little maid. She naturally had never come into contact with treasures like the stone ring. Lin Tian put away the materials and said goodbye to Mi Fei. Take care, Mi Fei said respectfully and personally sent Lin Tian to the door. Mi Fei was very polite and respectful to anyone who entered the Array Manipulator Association. This was a kind of attitude. However, her attitude towards Lin Tian was a little different. Mi Fei had a heartfelt respect for Lin Tian. This respect did not come from Lin Tian's identity as an array manipulator, but from Lin Tian's peaceful attitude towards others. Walking out of the Array Manipulator Association, Lin Tian quickly returned to the Martial House. At this time, the sky was already dark. Lin Tian swallowed a fasting pill and went to the top pavilion. He took out the materials in the stone ring and started to inscribe spirit-gathering patterns. Having just reached the second level of the Divine Vein realm, Lin Tian wanted to stabilize his realm. The night passed quickly. The next day, Lin Tian left the top pavilion early in the morning and went to the Array Manipulator Association again. After accepting a few missions, he walked towards the dark forest. The moon drop cost a lot of guild points. He had to go to the dark forest at least 5 or 6 times. Moreover, he could take the opportunity to train in the dark forest. Not long after leaving the association, Lin Tian walked towards the city gate. Once again, he felt a pair of eyes staring at him. The location of the eyes was exactly the same as yesterday. Lin Tian snorted coldly in his heart, but he did not stop and walked out of the city gate. About 2 hours later, Lin Tian arrived at the dark forest. Based on his familiarity with the dark forest, he quickly found the target of his first mission. The first mission was to hunt for the brain of the Class 4 demonic beast, Green Sky Condor. After Lin Tian fought with the Green Sky Condor, he finished the battle in about half an hour. After keeping the Green Sky Condor's brain and beast core, he left immediately. After that, the missions were all completed quickly. Time to go back. After muttering to himself, Lin Tian shot out of the dark forest and walked towards Fengjian City. In the next few days, Lin Tian traveled back and forth between the dark forest and Fengjian City, completing one mission after another. During this process, every time he left and returned to Fengjian City, he would always feel a pair of cold eyes staring at him from the city gate. It was as if they were monitoring his every move. Lin Tian did not care about this from beginning to end. It was as if he did not notice these hostile eyes. The night sky was dark, and stars were revolving around it. In the Nine-Yang Martial House, Lin Tian sat in the top pavilion. The 5 fingers of his right hand moved together, and strange patterns fell down and landed on the initiation scroll. These patterns were different from the array patterns that he had drawn before. Although they were formed by 5 basic patterns, they were shockingly long. They continued to extend and did not close together. It was as if they were 5 chains. Soon, Lin Tian stopped what he was doing. After the initial scroll was completely unfurled, it was around 30 feet long. And on this 30 feet long scroll, Lin Tian had drawn a long black pattern. At each end of the black pattern was a circular square array, as if he wanted to place some sort of object inside. 3rd rank silent lock pattern. What will the effect be after linking it with the martial fusion pattern? Lin Tian muttered. In the slightly dim top pavilion, a cold light flashed in his eyes. Time passed quickly. Gradually, a wisp of the morning sun appeared on the horizon. In the top pavilion, Lin Tian stretched his arms and tilted his head to the side. There were dozens of completed martial fusion pattern scrolls and dozens of silent lock pattern scrolls. With a wave of his right hand, he put all these scrolls into the stone ring. I've prepared for so long. Don't let me down. Lin Tianling smiled. After leaving a small note for Lin Shi, Lin Tian walked out of the martial house and quickly arrived at the Array Manipulator Guild. After accepting a few guild missions, he once again walked towards the dark forest. As usual, when he passed by the city gate, he once again felt that cold gaze. This time, the coldness in the gaze was even more intense. In response, Lin Tian seemed to be unaware of it and walked out of Fengjian City without changing his pace. Near the city gate, in a luxurious restaurant, dozens of youths were gathered together. All of them were very powerful, and their bodies were filled with bloody killing intent. Among these people, there were two youths who were the most outstanding. They were Su Muyang and Mog. Su Muyang stared in the direction Lin Tian left. His eyes were sometimes calm and sometimes cold. After glancing at Su Muyang, Mog also looked outside the city gate. His eyes were as cold as knives. In the past few days, he has been going to the dark forest every day. Today, it's time to act. Because he has the Deputy General's order, we can only act in the dark forest. Moreover, we must kill him in one battle. After a pause, Mog continued, "You better think carefully. If he doesn't die, you will never be able to enter the Imperial Courtyard in the Imperial City." Su Muyang stared outside the city. After a while, his eyes finally turned completely cold. "Fine. I'll go with you." Chapter 111. Remember the literature building in 1 second. We provide you with interesting novels to read. In the dark forest, Lin Tian's figure flashed through the forest. At this moment, he was holding the origin returning sword in his hand. The ear-piercing sound of the sword reverberated in the air. It was unknown how many old trees in the vicinity were destroyed by the sharp sword aura. A moment later, a blood-curdling scream sounded. A huge demonic figure fell from the sky. This was the Greenwood Eagle, an early Class 4 demonic beast. Lin Tian spent a lot of effort to shoot it down from the sky. "Those that can fly are troublesome," Lin Tian muttered to himself. Lin Tian took some of the Greenwood Eagle's blood essence and dug out its beast core before leaving. It had been 6 hours since Lin Tian arrived at the dark forest. In these 6 hours, Lin Tian encountered many demonic beasts. Apart from the Greenwood Eagle, he used the meteorite-shattering fist to fight against the other demonic beasts. Now, he had already cultivated this fist art to the great accomplishment stage. Moon Rain Stone, Silver Root, and Ice Stone Tortoise Beast Core, Lin Tian muttered to himself. This time, he received 5 missions and had already completed 2 of them. He only needed to complete the last 3. After a slight pause, Lin Tian shot to his left. Soon after, he found the Moon Rain Stone in a small canyon. Soon after, he found the Silver Root not far away. After storing the 2 items into his stone ring, Lin Tian walked deeper into the forest. The Ice Stone Tortoise was a Class 4 mid-grade demonic beast. It had the cold attribute of ice and a tough demonic body like diamond. It was comparable to a second-stage Divine Vein Realm expert. It would normally appear around 3,000 zhang away from the dark forest. Lin Tian was extremely fast. After half an hour, he arrived at a small lake and found an ice stone tortoise on the shore. "Such a big tortoise!" Lin Tian was shocked. This ice stone tortoise was 4 zhang tall, like a small mountain. Lin Tian took a deep breath. Since he was already here, he had no choice but to attack. This time, Lin Tian didn't dare to only use his fist. The ice stone tortoise's body was covered with black ice spikes, leaving no space for his fist to land. Clang! The sound of the sword was ear-piercing. Lin Tian took out the sword of Guiyuan and used the shocking wind sword art to meet the attack. The ice stone tortoise was sleeping soundly. When it sensed someone approaching, its mountain-like body suddenly moved. It let out a sound like a cow's cry and stared at Lin Tian with its eyes wide open. Lin Tian flipped the sword in his hand and chopped down. With a clang, the sword of Guiyuan landed on the ice stone tortoise, but it couldn't cut through. "It's hard enough," Lin Tian thought. At this time, the ice stone tortoise had already stepped forward, and a huge shadow quickly covered Lin Tian. Lin Tian sucked in a breath of cold air and quickly retreated. The ice stone tortoise's legs were shockingly huge. If it really stepped on them, they would probably be turned into meat paste. Seeing that Lin Tian was retreating, the ice stone tortoise let out a low roar. Its eyes suddenly turned red, and it quickly chased after him. This turtle is quite fast. Lin Tian was slightly surprised. Pausing for a moment, Lin Tian's sword momentum changed, and a burst of domineering sword intent spread out from his body. Azure Thunder Sword Technique. Boom! Thunder roared. Lin Tian stepped on the yin and yang liang, like a thunder god, and arrived in front of the ice stone tortoise in the blink of an eye. Squatting slightly, Lin Tianyi jumped up and displayed the essence of the Azure Thunder Sword Technique in the air, gathering the endless power of thunder. Chop! Lin Tian coldly shouted. This sword burst out with silver light, condensing Lin Tian's strongest power. With a puff, blood sputtered. The ice stone tortoise's head was pierced through by the sword, and its huge monster body immediately fell to the ground. Lin Tian landed steadily on the ground and exhaled a mouthful of turbid air. Taking out a dagger from the stone ring, Lin Tian quickly cut open the ice stone tortoise's head and took out a fist-sized beast core. This ice stone tortoise's mission was to obtain the stone tortoise's beast core. By this time, all the missions had been completed. Lin Tian went back the way he came, and shot out of the dark forest. The terrain of this huge forest was complicated, but Lin Tian had been here several times, so he naturally knew the terrain well. He nimbly flashed between the old trees. Soon, Lin Tian had walked for about 3,000 feet. At this moment, Lin Tian suddenly stopped. Come out! Standing in place, Lin Tiantan said coldly. There were clusters of old trees all around, and each one would require at least 3 people to wrap their arms around it. These old trees grew very well, so much so that it was difficult for the sun to shine through. Only bits and pieces of the sun shone through the gaps between the leaves into the forest. Lin Tian stood in place, his face indifferent and his eyes cold. After a few breaths, a dozen figures stood out from behind the old trees in front of him. Most of them were around 25 years old. In the center of these dozen people, 2 figures stood side by side. It was Su Muyang in purple and Mog in black. Good spirit sense, Mog said coldly. Lin Tian glanced at Mog, but his eyes fell on Su Muyang. You also want to get involved? Staring at Su Muyang, Lin Tian felt a little strange. He wasn't confused that Mog wanted to kill him, as he already knew this would happen. However, Su Muyang also wanted to kill him, which made him feel a little strange. Logically speaking, he and Su Muyang had no enmity, and Su Muyang and Mog were just ordinary friends. Su Muyang shouldn't kill him for Mog. Only one person from the inner house can win the Imperial Courtyard selection. You can only die here, Su Muyang said coldly. Hearing this, Lin Tian immediately understood. So that's how it is. Staring ahead, Lin Tianwei glanced around, and found that there were 19 people. These 19 people were not weak, and the weakest among them was at the early stage of the Holy Range realm. Smiling, Lin Tian's eyes fell on Mog. In order to deal with me, you really put together such a big lineup. 19 Holy Range realm experts. One of them was at the 4th layer of the Holy Range realm, one was at the 3rd layer of the Holy Range realm, 8 were at the 2nd layer of the Holy Range realm, and 5 were at the early stage of the Holy Range realm. Such a lineup was more than enough to kill a peak 4th layer Holy Range realm expert. The expeditionary army pays attention to winning every battle. We never fight a battle that we are not confident in. Literature building, Mog said coldly. Lin Tian's lips curled up. Are you trying to say that I am going to die today? Mog snorted and didn't hide his killing intent. Who do you think you are to question my words? Any one of my soldiers is enough to kill you. We came together because we don't want any accidents. Your soldiers? I see. I heard that you are working in the Empire's expeditionary army. It seems like it is true. As he spoke, Lin Tian looked at the rest. As for you guys, you really have guts. Don't you know that I am the deputy commander of the general? You actually dared to come with him to kill me. Aren't you afraid that your 9 generations will be annihilated? Hearing this, the dozen or so people's expressions changed slightly. Obviously, these people all knew that Lin Tian was in control of the deputy commander of the general. Humph! The Empire's expeditionary army has 18 people in a group. Since we are in a group, we should be united. One of them stared at Lin Tian and said coldly, Besides, no one will know about this because the dead can't talk. As these words fell, the others calmed down. They stared at Lin Tian with even colder eyes. United? Using these words on such a shameless thing, I can't believe you can say it. Lin Tian shook his head. You! The person who spoke suddenly had a cold expression. Enough. Don't waste your breath on him. Emoji said coldly. As he spoke, he took a step forward. His eyes became as ferocious as a wild beast's. You killed my brother and went against my Mo family. You should know what your end will be. Staring at Lin Tian, Emoji's eyes were extremely terrifying. Emoson? He's just trash. So what if I killed him? I didn't think that killing him would dirty my hands. You should feel grateful for him. Facing Emoji's eyes and the dozen or so people in front of him, Lin Tian looked very calm. As for your so-called Mo family, forgive my ignorance, but what is your Mo family? Do you think you're royalty? Emoji's eyes widened. You're courting death. Without any fancy moves, Emoji raised his hand and punched at Lin Tian. Lin Tian snorted. He didn't dodge or retreat, but raised his fist to meet the attack. With a bang, the two fists collided. Both of them took a few steps back. 4th layer of the divine range? You're just SOSO. Lin Tiantan said indifferently. In terms of physique, he could compete with a 4th layer of the divine range now. Your body is not bad. However, it's only a little stronger. It's not good enough. Emoji said coldly. Not good enough? Lin Tian narrowed his eyes. Emoji said coldly. Don't be unconvinced, and don't think that your 9-star talent is so great. For our expeditionary army, you're nothing. We cultivate the art of killing. At the same level, killing you is as easy as slaughtering a dog. Hearing this, Lin Tian couldn't help but laugh. Emoji, aren't you afraid that the wind will cut your tongue? Staring at Emoji, Lin Tian's mocking expression was obvious to anyone. Emoji stared at Lin Tian, his eyes even colder. Ling Gang, you go. Show him how far he is from us. Remember, don't kill him. Just cut off one of his arms. I want to keep him alive and bring him to my brother's grave. I want to cut off his head and offer it to my brother. Emoji said ruthlessly. Understood. A young man walked out, his eyes as sharp as knives. His name was Ling Gang, and he was in the 2nd layer of the divine range. A 9-star talent genius. If only I could kill you directly. Unfortunately, Commander Mo only asked me to cut off one of your arms. Staring at Lin Tian, Ling Gang sneered and drew a long saber from his back. Don't worry. My saber is powerful and fast. It can cut people in an instant. In the blink of an eye, your arm will be cut off. It won't be too painful. You're really confident. Lin Tian said sarcastically. Ling Gang's eyes turned cold, and he instantly moved. With a clang, the sound of a saber rang out. The long saber stirred up a gust of wind, like a ferocious tiger trying to devour Lin Tian. Lin Tian stood on the spot, not moving at all. Why? Are you so scared that you can't move? So weak? Ling Gang shook his head. As soon as he finished speaking, Ling Gang's saber aura instantly became faster and fiercer. Lin Tian still stood on the spot, not moving until Ling Gang's saber approached him. Then, he took a step to the left. At the same time, the sword of origin restoration appeared in his hand, and he slashed down. Pooh! Ah! Blood splattered, and a blood-curdling scream rang out. Ling Gang's saber-wielding right hand was cut off by Lin Tian's sword. How is this possible? Such a scene caused many people's expressions to change. Su Muyang was shocked. Ling Gang was indeed very strong. Even he had to put in some effort to take him down. However, Lin Tian had cut off Ling Gung's arm in an instant. This shocked Su Miang. Ling Gung's forehead was covered in cold sweat from the pain. He clutched his severed arm and retreated. Unfortunately, how could Lin Tian let him retreat? With a sweep of his right leg, he knocked Ling Gung to the ground and then stomped on Ling Gung's chest. Instantly, the sound of bones breaking could be heard. Ling Gung screamed again, blood gushing out of his mouth. Stepping on Ling Gung's chest, Lin Tian looked at Mog. Is this the expeditionary army expert you mentioned who cultivates the art of killing? Is this what you meant by killing me like a dog? Shaking his head, Lin Tian said sarcastically. Before I entered the residence, I heard that there was a very powerful Mog in the residence. After I entered the residence, there were even more rumors. But now, it seems that the rumors were too fake. Powerful? Ha! He's just a despicable person who thinks he's infallible. Mog's face darkened, and his eyes revealed a murderous glint. Let him go, and I'll let you die a quick death, Mog said coldly. Staring at Lin Tian, a ferocious blood aura spread from Mog's body. Chapter 112. Mog's face darkened. No one had ever dared to humiliate him like this since he was a child. Read. I'll say it again. Let him go, and I'll let you die a quick death, Mog said coldly. Lin Tian laughed, his face full of disdain. The sword of origin restoration was raised lightly, and its tip landed on Ling Gung's throat, drawing a shallow line of blood. Stop, stop, Ling Gung said in a trembling voice. It was fine to lose his right arm, but if his throat was pierced, even a god would not be able to save him. Lin Tian looked down at Ling Gung and said, It's not up to me to stop. Ask your commander, Mo. As long as he's willing to lower his head and apologize, I'll let you go immediately. Ling Gung subconsciously tilted his head and looked at Mog. Mog's murderous aura was undisguised and wanton as he stared at Lin Tian Dao. If you dare to kill him, I promise I'll make you wish you were dead. You're their leader, but you're not willing to plead for mercy for your subordinates? Lin Tian laughed. Let him go! Mog's eyes were as cold as knives. Lin Tian's face was calm as he tilted his head and looked at the young man who had spoken first. Didn't you say that the expeditionary army is united? Now your companion is facing death. Why aren't you speaking? The dozen or so people were shocked. Someone looked at Mog. Commander Mo, let him go! Mog only stared at Lin Tian, his voice carrying a frightening chill. Looking at Mog, Lin Tian couldn't help but smile. The sword of origin restoration in his right hand flickered with sword light. Ling Gung trembled even more. Stop, stop! Don't kill me! Lin Tian looked down at Ling Gung, his face full of sarcasm. For Mog, you risked the 9 generations of your family to kill me. But now, when you're facing death, he won't even lower his head. I really feel sorry for you. How should I put it? Don't hate me. If you want to hate someone, hate yourself for being so stupid. The sword of origin restoration made an ear-piercing clang. Ah! Ling Gung roared in despair. His eyes were filled with hatred and regret. In the next moment, the sword of origin in Lin Tian's hand shot out a ray of sword radiance and pierced through his throat. The entire space fell silent. It was dead silent. 19 people had come, but one of them was killed in the blink of an eye. Many people looked at Mog. Lin Tian's words were still echoing in their ears. They had risked the 9 generations of their families to help Mog kill Lin Tian, but when someone was in danger, Mog's attitude was like this. At that moment, many people's expressions turned ugly. Mog's eyes flashed with terrifying killing intent as he walked towards Lin Tian. I will make you wish you were dead, Mog said coldly. With a clang, Mog pulled out a long spear from behind him and swept it towards Lin Tian. Lin Tian's eyes narrowed, and he charged forward with the sword of Guiyuan. With a clang, the two collided, and Lin Tian was forced to take a few steps back. High-grade spirit spear! Lin Tian's eyes narrowed. At that moment, Emoji had charged forward again. Rays of spear radiance shot out, shocking everyone. Lin Tian countered with the wind-shocking sword technique. Although he was disgusted with Emoji, he had to admit that this person was really strong. He was probably no match for him in a head-on confrontation. Clang! Once again, the spear and sword collided, and Lin Tian was sent flying again. Worm! Emoji said coldly, his eyes fierce. Lin Tian snorted, and the wind-shocking sword technique swept out. Hundreds of rays of sword radiance bloomed in an instant. Emoji roared, and he still used his spear to wipe out all of them. At that moment, in the distance, Sumuyang shook the long sword in his hand and slashed out a ray of dazzling sword radiance, heading straight for Lin Tian. Lin Tian's expression changed slightly. He stepped on the yin and yang puppet and barely dodged the sword radiance. Staring at Sumuyang, Lin Tian's eyes flashed with a faint light, indifferent and cold. Sumuyang frowned. He felt that there was something strange about Lin Tian. He was being pressured by so many experts, but he still looked calm. There was no trace of panic on his face. Shaking his head, Sumuyang's eyes turned cold. He shook the long sword in his hand and slashed out another threatening sword radiance. I'm sorry, but you can only die here, Sumuyang said indifferently. Lin Tian dodged and sidestepped the sword radiance. On the other side, Emoji pressed forward with his spear, almost piercing Lin Tian's chest. You must die today, Emoji said cruelly. As he spoke, the long spear in his hand shone even brighter. Lin Tian immediately felt great pressure. This attack was definitely not simple. He turned the long sword in his hand. He stopped using the wind-shocking sword technique, and instead used the Azure Thunder Sword technique to face Emoji. Boom! As soon as the Azure Thunder Sword technique was used, the entire space was filled with the sound of thunder. Clang! 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 The spear and the sword collided continuously. Lin Tian was knocked back again and again. Piercing sword! A cold voice sounded. Sumuyang approached and pressed down with the long sword in his hand like a snake. Lin Tian was fighting with Emoji. Now that Sumuyang attacked together, Lin Tian immediately felt more pressure. Dodging Emoji's long spear, Lin Tian raised the Guiyuan sword to block. With a clang, the Guiyuan sword and Sumuyang's sword collided. Lin Tian's body trembled, and he was knocked back 3 steps. High-grade spiritual sword! Lin Tian was not surprised that Sumuyang had a high-grade spiritual weapon. After all, he was the strongest person in the inner house. Clang! Clang! 2 clangs sounded at the same time. Emoji and Sumuyang attacked together. One was in the 4th tier of the divine range, and the other was in the 3rd tier of the divine range. Both of them had high-grade spiritual weapons. Lin Tian immediately felt more pressure. However, his expression remained calm from beginning to end. Come! Holding the sword across his chest, Lin Tian smiled and swung the wind-shocking sword. Hundreds of sword auras flew in all directions, and the sword chi was overwhelming. These sword auras were powerful and terrifying, but they were nothing in the eyes of experts like Emoji and Sumuyang. Sumuyang swung his long sword and shattered all the sword chi. After that, Sumuyang looked behind him and shouted, What are you waiting for? Attack together and kill him as fast as you can. If we let him escape today, none of us will benefit. More than a dozen people glanced at Emoji. Their faces darkened, and they attacked together. Kill! Someone shouted. A total of 16 people attacked at the same time. Some were holding sabers, some were using swords, and some were carrying long spears. They were all extraordinary. Boom! For a moment, wild waves spread out, and the old trees were shattered. Lin Tian's face turned serious. These people were indeed not simple. They were much stronger than cultivators of the same level. With a clang, he performed the Azure Thunder Sword technique to the extreme. Rolling thunder and sword roared, going in and out of the 18 people and sweeping in all directions. Spear! Emoji shouted coldly. The dazzling spear light closed in. Lin Tian blocked it with the sword of origin restoration, but he was immediately sent flying. Almost at the same time, Su Muyang approached and slashed with his sword. Lin Tian's right hand shook, and he slashed with the sword of destruction, which collided with Su Muyang's sword aura. Bloodfall sword! Kill! Fatal 3 blades! Cold voices rang out one after another. After Su Muyang and MOG, the other 16 people attacked together, forming a murderous torrent. Lin Tianwei was slightly moved, but he was not afraid. One sword! A cold light flashed across his eyes. Lin Tian performed the Azure Thunder Sword technique to the extreme and swept it away. In a powerful collision, Lin Tian swept away 16 people at the same time, but he was also forced to retreat. A faint trace of blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. Die! At this moment, MOG suddenly approached. His long spear was surrounded by a murderous aura like the blood of hell. It was extremely cold. Lin Tian raised his long sword to block, but on the other side, Su Muyang also approached, waving his sword down with his right hand. Lin Tian was expressionless. He blocked MOG's spear with his long sword, while his left hand clenched into a fist and swung at Su Muyang's sword. Clang! Dong! The sword of origin restoration in his right hand pushed away MOG's long spear, and his left hand clenched into a fist to push away Su Muyang's long sword. However, Lin Tian himself was hit by the powerful recoil of the two attacks. He flew backward with a bang, and he could not help but cough up blood in the air. Whoosh! At this moment, the sound of breaking air was heard, and a silver arrow came from afar. It's over! Many people looked cruel. Lin Tian was in the air and could not avoid this arrow. He would die. However, the next moment, everyone was moved. In the air, Lin Tian stepped slightly with his right leg, and his whole body moved more than 3 meters away in a strange way. The silver arrow missed its target and nailed into an old tree not far away. Only the tail of the arrow was exposed. It was obvious how powerful this arrow was. How is it possible? He is clearly in the air. How can he move? Some people were shocked. MOG stared at Lin Tian with a ferocious look in his eyes. On the other side, Su Muyang frowned deeply. He felt more and more strange about Lin Tian. Lin Tian landed firmly on the ground. He tilted his head and looked in the direction of the arrow. He saw a middle-aged man standing there, looking at him in disbelief. First sky of the Holy Range. The Mo family has good eyesight. Lin Tian sneered. The arrow just now was perfect in terms of timing and power. If he had not practiced the yin and yang puppet to the second level, he would not have been able to avoid that arrow. Even if he did not die, he would lose a layer of skin. Wiping the blood from the corner of his mouth, Lin Tian glanced around. He was still not afraid. After a pause, he saw that no one was coming. He smiled and looked in a direction. Stepping on the yin and yang puppet, he rushed out. Don't even think about escaping! In this direction, an expeditionary army expert shouted and chopped down with his blade. Get lost! Lin Tianling shouted. The sword of Guyuan knocked away the man's long blade and punched out with his left hand. With a bang, the expeditionary army expert flew backward and crashed into an old tree. Blood gushed out of his mouth, along with some pieces of his heart. Lin Tian used a meteorite fist and killed the man with one punch. You can't escape, Emoji said coldly. Emoji chased after him with his spear. Go after him, Su Muyang shouted. The others looked serious, but they did not stop and rushed out as fast as they could. They had to kill Lin Tian. If Lin Tian was lucky enough to escape, what awaited them would be a desperate disaster. The sound of something breaking through the air reverberated, and one figure after another flashed through the forest. Lin Tian looked behind him expressionlessly, and chopped out rays of sword light. Not long after, a rather spacious grassland appeared in front of them. Here, Lin Tian stopped. Whoosh! 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 The sound of breaking air kept ringing. MOG and the others caught up. A dozen people surrounded Lin Tian. Run! Why don't you run? Emoji said coldly. Su Muyang stood aside and stared coldly at Lin Tian. Run? Lin Tian was surrounded by nearly 20 divine range experts. At this moment, he was not afraid at all. Instead, he smiled coldly. You want me to run in my territory? Hearing this, many people were stunned. Soon someone laughed. Your territory? What a joke! Are you scared out of your wits? This person was sarcastic. Emoji took a step forward, his spear cold. I'll cripple your limbs first, then I'll take you to my brother's grave to apologize. Then, Emoji attacked Lin Tian with his spear. This spear was very powerful, so powerful that even Su Muyang was shaken. However, Lin Tian was very calm. He did not even have any intention of dodging. You love your brother so much. Not bad. Today, I'll send you to hell and let you brothers reunite. Staring at Emoji, the corners of Lin Tian's mouth curled up, revealing an extremely cruel smile. Sky Thunder Sword Formation, open! Clang! In an instant, dense sword energy soared into the sky, covering the space within 100 feet. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.